Hey everyone, good evening. Welcome to This Week in Tech, episode 56. In this episode, we're going to be talking about not only we're going to be talking about motherboard chipsets because I think that's one thing that I haven't talked about recently or needs to be talked about. We're also going to go over Ghost of Tsushima on PC because the system requirements for that game now is officially posted. And it looks like that game is going to be a very good PC port of what was a very good PS4 game when it first came out a couple of years ago. So, hey guys, so you guys are on time. Yeah, I try to be on time. Sometimes I'm not even on time for this show. So, I anytime I see comments like first or on time, I realize, okay, well, I'm probably on time. So, assuming those are the only comments. But how's everybody doing? We're kind of in a drought in terms of technology or like PC DIY related news. There's not a lot going on. I feel like, I've said this last stream, we're in a holding period. I consider this a holding period. So like if you're thinking of upgrading your computer, it really kind of depends on what you currently have. But I feel like most people that are thinking of upgrading or that are on the fence, it's probably worth waiting a few more months because in the summer things are going to change. The PC landscape is definitely going to get flipped upside down later this summer. So you guys are doing good. That's good. So I guess I don't have a lot of specific stories to cover. These are the ones that kind of stood out to me. So I know we've talked about Zen 5 recently, which for those that don't know, that's the upcoming Ryzen 9000 series. So those are the newest CPUs that will be out later this summer. We're getting closer and closer, and stories like this one about Asus confirming Ryzen 9000. Now, okay, when they say Asus confirms, nobody from Asus actually said anything. This is official, though, because somebody found that if you go to the ROG Strix B650E gaming Wi-Fi support page, and you click on the BIOS and firmware download, you see the updated AGESA. In fact, I've found a couple of examples here. Let me show you guys. So this is the MSI Meg Ace. MSI, as of today, also released a beta update, a beta BIOS for the Ace, and they also had one for the Carbon Wi-Fi as of Monday. And in the description it reads, AGESA Combo Pi 1.1.7.0. That's almost like an IP address, although IP addresses don't have like a 0 for a host address. But anyway, that's a complete tangent. So AGESA 1170 patch A, it says in the notes, updated for next-gen CPU. Now, at first glance, you might think, oh, that's just the 8700G, the APU. No, because that was added way back in a BIOS from late last year. So right here. So that was added. Support for AMD Ryzen 8000 series CPU. That was back in October. That was a while ago. But these recent BIOS updates have added AGESA 1170. And in this article from WCCF Tech, it says here that I don't know where this comes from. Like, I don't know where this is from. I've seen this from like Igor's lab. I don't know where this comes from. But the system management unit change log with all the different versions, it's posted here. And what I found interesting, so even though Granite Ridge, which is basically Zen 5, is supported in this new BIOS update, the one thing that also kind of stood out to me was the fact that Raphael also got an update. And for those that don't know, Raphael is the 7000 series Ryzen CPUs. So the 7000 series did get an update in this new BIOS The Phoenix, which are the 8000 series APUs, like the 8700G, the 8600G, those didn't get any updates. So the last time we got a Raphael update was in Combo AM5 1080, which was a while ago. That was the update to 84.79.223, which was a slight change. 1080. To find out what that is, I'd have to go back and look right here. So 1080, that was when the Ryzen 8000 series were added. So there was a change for the AGESA code back then. A slight one. So basically when 8000 series came out, Raphael got an update. Then there were all these updates for stuff like skin temperature aware monitoring, and they had to change that stuff so that the desktop CPUs wouldn't downclock too much, because they were trying to behave like laptop processors with that skin temperature aware. If you guys remember, Steve from Gamers Nexus did the STAP video thumbnail. That's what that was about. But now Granite Ridge is added to the existing motherboards, and this goes back to what I was saying last year even, was that if you have a X670 or B650 motherboard, you do have an upgrade path to multiple different CPUs later down the line, and these AGESA updates are proof of that. So it's basically I want to quote like somebody from Star Wars all of a sudden. You're fulfilling your destiny. It's like that's basically what's happening here. The X670 and B650 are fulfilling their destiny of being able to support these upcoming CPUs. So that's really nice to see. That means that if you have a AM5 board now, even if you don't plan on upgrading to Zen 5, you could probably go to Zen 6 or maybe Zen 5 X3D whenever those show up, which is probably, if I had to guess, early next year, or maybe late this year. We'll see. It kind of depends on what happens, or how long of a launch window the non-X3D Zen 5 CPUs have. So that's nice to see. This is why I'm saying, like, it's gonna get interesting. It's kind of boring right now. There's a lot of stuff on the horizon, literally, but we're just gonna have to wait it out. So that's why I've been more focused on the gaming side of things, because I know this channel covers mostly computer hardware, but sometimes we do delve into gaming, and when we're in an off season like this, or a holding period, now is when gaming becomes more relevant to me, at least in terms of content to talk about on the channel. So that's one of the things. Like Final Fantasy XIV, the Dawntrail benchmark came out. I posted a video earlier this week showing, I tested a whole bunch of GPUs and tried to make that video the best I could in the shortest amount of time possible, just to show all the results for those that were curious about whether or not their system needs to be upgraded if they're going to play the game at 1440p or maybe 4K, because Square Enix did not publish any of the details on what you need if you're going to play the game at 1440p. They only published 720p, which I don't know who's going to play Final Fantasy XIV at 720p, unless you're on some old laptop from a decade ago or something like that. But yeah, they did 720p, 1080p, and then nothing else. So I was like, okay, well, that leaves a lot of people hanging if they have a 1440p monitor. So considering that's the one that's trending upward in terms of the resolution that a lot of gamers are playing on when it comes to the PC platform. So anyway, that's I guess we can go into that a little bit. I did want to show you guys just kind of the test results so you have an idea, and we can make this a small segment of the live stream. But so if you're going to be playing Final Fantasy XIV later this summer, like I am, because I'm definitely playing, so this info is very relevant to me. The 1440p results, I tested everything from an RTX 4090 and a 7900 XTX up at the top there, all the way down to the ancient, and my green screen is going to remove all the green parts on this, so it's going to look kind of weird, but the GTX 1080 from NVIDIA, the Founders Edition. So this is probably my favorite, one of my favorite reference cards of all time, the blower style 1080. So that one at 1440p finally fell below 60 FPS. I remember the 1080, the GTX 1080, I considered that GPU a 1440p GPU from day one, and I had used that GPU for years as a 1440p GPU, despite the name, and which is kind of ironic. So I was curious, like, okay, well, how well does the GTX 1080 hold up at 1440p in Dawntrail? And I was surprised that finally, after all these years, after literally 8 years, almost 8 years, it'll be 8 years next month for the GTX 1080, an 8-year-old graphics card, finally falls below 60 FPS in Final Fantasy XIV, a 11-year-old game. Or it's like a 10-and-a-half-year-old game at this point. So an 8-year-old GPU since day one was handling this game for years at 1440p, 144 hertz, and now finally, with all the graphical changes that Square Enix did to the game, it now falls below 60 FPS. And keep in mind, this is with the best CPU for gaming. This is the 7800X3D. I mean, I could have tested with a 7950X3D, but I don't like to mess with my with the secondary PC for streaming. So that's why I use the 7800X3D. And I feel like that's more of a inclusive CPU for the general public. Like what people are typically going to be playing on is usually at that price point. Not a lot of people are going to spend like $600 on a CPU. So that's why I didn't do the dual CCD one. Although the results are pretty much the same because I tested the 4090 on both and it was pretty much identical. So the GTX 1080 though, 55 FPS. I could have tested Vega 64 because I do also have Vega 64, the blower style reference card. The reason why I didn't do that is like if you look up Steam hardware survey, like no one's using Vega 64 anymore. It's like there's barely anybody still using GTX 1080, but there's still people using it. And the 1080, it also, you can think of it as showing the results for the RTX 2060 and 2060 Super. So I feel like that result, that 55 FPS, that includes, it basically covers a lot of other GPUs that are slightly newer than it to a lot newer than it. So like a 3050, 8 gig, and those type of GPUs might also be included in there on desktop. So, and the RX 5700, like the non-XT, that would probably also be a little bit above the 1080. But yeah, and then I did 5700 XT. That one does 67. 5700 XT is kind of like the 1080 Ti. It's kind of like a 1080 Ti, sort of. I mean, depending on the title, it's a little bit worse. It's historically a little bit worse. Sometimes it's a little bit better in modern games. But if you're curious to know how a 1080 Ti does, it's pretty much around 5700 XT. So, better than 1080. It lines up nicely. So, the good news is the ancient 1080 Ti can still handle Final Fantasy XIV maxed out at 1440p and average above 60 FPS. So, the bad news is the minimums for the 1080 Ti are going to be sub 60, just like all these other GPUs that have similar performance to the 1080 Ti. One of the GPUs that did impress me, though, I do have to call it out. The one that did impress me for 1440p was the Intel Arc graphics card. So the Intel Arc A750. I could have tested A770, but I did not want to pull that out of my Threadripper PC. So I tested A750, basically to further justify me actually having bought one of these. So I was like, hey, I forgot about Intel. I need to test Intel for this game. So just toss in the A750 because that never sees any use and no one ever talks about it. If anyone ever talks about Intel GPUs, they only ever talk about the A770, and sometimes they mention the A380 for like an AV1 render encoding card or something, but that's so pointless because if you have any modern current generation graphics card, all of them have AV1 encoders. So yeah, but anyway, like no one ever talks about the A750. So I was like, I'm just going to throw A750 in here and see how it does. And it basically does very similar. It's like a little bit better than the RX 7600, which is actually quite surprising because when I reviewed the RX 7600 last year, it's almost been a year now that I think about it, that GPU hands down beat the Intel A770, basically in everything. In energy efficiency, perf per watt, all the average FPSs were higher. But now the thing is, I tested that at 1080p. Now, when we test at 1440p, the RX 7600 falls back more than the Intel GPUs. And that's because the Intel GPUs have wider memory buses and they just have more horsepower, more of everything in terms of hardware. So that's why they're able to slightly pull in front of it. Now, although it's very, very slight. So, but yeah, those two are good. And then if you want like smooth, the 6700 XT or better, there's a huge gap. I noticed from my testing, I don't have a good GPU that is between the 6700 XT and the 3080 Ti. Like if you notice in here, the 6700 XT does 87 FPS, but then the next GPU that I tested was the 3080 Ti, and that's like way higher than the 6700 XT. So it's like, unfortunately for me, I don't have anything that's in that middle ground, like that 4070, that 7800 XT or that 7700 XT. I don't have any of those to test. So it's like I didn't have a good step between 87 to like 136. So there's like a massive jump there. So why didn't I test ASA? I just answered that a few minutes ago. I didn't want to take it out of the Threadripper. And I had the A750 literally just sitting in the box. And it's been sitting in the box for months. And I was like, hey, I have to justify spending money on this somehow. So I might as well just benchmark this and give it a purpose. Give it something to do, basically. So, yeah. If I had to guess, A770 will probably be like 77 frames per second. It's not going to be that much better than an A750. So in this title, but A750 did pretty good. I was not expecting it to beat the 7600. Although at 1080p, I think the numbers would be different. I never tested 1080p because the reason why I didn't test 1080p is because Square Enix already provided data. Like they already published what you need to have if you want to play at 1080p and 720p. So I was like, well, they didn't mention 1440p and they didn't mention 4K. So I'm going to have to test those two resolutions to get results. And this is what I came up with. So you guys can see, you don't need, if you're on 1440p, you don't need a high-end, like a super high-end graphics card to play this game. Any modern mid-range GPU, like a 7800 XT or an RTX 4070 or 4070 Super, all of those cards are going to do perfectly fine, probably somewhere in the era of like 110 to 120 something frames per second if I had to guess. Maybe even more. So, because you guys can see like 3080 Ti, that's kind of like a 4070 Ti, and it does around 136 in this title at 1440p, so it's like you can only imagine the others will be very similar. So the good news is if you're at 1440p, you don't have to spend that much money to upgrade your graphics card for this game. And that's kind of what I wanted to prove out in doing these benchmarks. Now, 4K is a completely different story. So 4K, let me get to the scores here. So 4K is where you do have to spend more money. So, and we've talked about this before. 4K, this is the reason why I say that the RTX 4090 is really kind of the only real 4K graphics card when you think about it. Because when you see results like this, technically the XTX and the 4080 are also, like, in this one game, those two GPUs, those $1,000 GPUs, they're 4K GPUs because their minimum FPS is above 60 at max settings. This is no upscaling. This is like straight up native resolution, 2160p, everything maxed out, all the graphical changes that the developers made to the game to make it harder to run. And these two GPUs can still, like, they don't even go below 60, right? So, and that's even in the most CPU bound situations. So that's why in this one game, those two are true 4K GPUs, as far as I'm concerned. But the 4090, realistically, like, this is the one, right? It doesn't go, like, 85 is the minimum at 4K max and 138 average. So yeah, this is the reason why I keep saying that the 4090 is the real 4K GPU, whereas these other ones are almost 4K. Like, some people might say, yeah, 3090 Ti, 7900 XT, those that's good enough, you know, like 85 FPS average with like a small dip below 60 on the minimum. So for an MMO, it's like, who cares, right? So yeah, like 4K, it's doable. I didn't test the lower end GPUs. I tested down to a 6950 XT and a 3080 Ti. Because once I noticed that those GPUs are hitting like 75 and their minimums are sub 60, that means the massive gap between the 6700 XT and the 6950 XT, there's going to be a massive drop. So I was like, at that point, you know, if someone's playing this on like a $400 GPU, they're probably not going to be playing it at 4K. So that's why I didn't bother to test those. So I kind of do it realistic. Like, from my point of view, if I had a 4K monitor, like, what's an acceptable GPU? You know what I mean? So that's why these are the results. So the good news is there's still a lot of leg room. Like, anyone who's on last generation 30 series or 6000 series Radeon, like, as long as you have a 6800 XT or a 3080 or better, you can play this game at 4K maxed out without any problems. So I guess that's the good news. So despite all the conclusion is, despite all the changes the developers kept boasting about, oh, we're going to change the graphics, it's going to make it look so good, we're going to raise the minimum requirements, you're going to need to upgrade your GPU, and they're going to warn you ahead of time by giving you guys the benchmark. That's the whole reason why we got this benchmark like 2.5 months before the expansion, is because the developers are wanting to give the players ample time to evaluate the performance of their machines and figure out if they need to upgrade or not. That's the reason why they did this. So that was really nice of them to do. I enjoyed testing it because I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy XIV. If you guys didn't know, I will be playing Dawntrail in early access in June when it comes out. And then all throughout July, I think that's pretty much the only game I'm going to be playing is probably this game. We're going to be doing all the level 100 content, max level, everything. I'm going to be playing as Viper, Pictomancer. I always level on the new jobs for the story, and then for the new expansion. So I'll experience the new jobs, and then I will probably go back and level up a tank and a healer so I can do all the endgame content as whatever role is necessary. So you still have yet to get 1440p monitor, much less a good 1080p monitor. Are you on a 1080p monitor right now? I mean, 1080p, look no further than the mighty GTX 1080. This is a box within a box. A box within a box. Man, my green screen ruins the green on this nice box. the GTX 1080. It's so cool. This is such a cool GPU. It looks so weird because the green screen's like making the box invisible. But yeah, the GTX 1080, every time I gotta pull this old GPU out to test, there's like so much nostalgia of the GTX 1080. It's such a good GPU. Your GPU can handle 1440p 144. 7800 XT can. Yeah, definitely can. The wallet can't handle 1440p. There it is. This is probably my favorite NVIDIA reference card. The GTX 1080 Founders Edition. Probably the best Founders Edition. It's so lightweight. It's so good. It's so quiet for a blower style. Man, this is good. This is good. This GPU can do 55 FPS at 1440p on Dawntrail. That means if you want to play this game at 60 on a GTX 1080... Hold on, let me go back. Where's the charts? If you want to play this at 60 FPS and you're still on a 1080 or a Vega 64, all you have to do is reduce the ambient occlusion from GTAO, because this game added GTAO, which is something that the current build does not have. You have to downgrade from GTAO to HBAO+. HBAO+ is what the current version does. The new version adds GTAO, which I don't know what GTAO even stands for, although I know it's an ambient occlusion. But they say it's newer and better than HBAO and HDAO. So HBAO has been the golden standard of ambient occlusion for Final Fantasy for pretty much 9 years at this point. $4090, $1440, $144. Like, I can find a monitor for that. So the monitor that I use for 1440p is it's an Agon AOC 144 hertz TN panel, 24 inches. But yeah, this was fun. This is probably one of the more fun benchmarking videos that I worked on. Like, typically these are a lot of work to do, so I don't really, and the return on investment for making this type of video, I don't get a lot of views for this video, and it's a lot of work. So anytime I see somebody benchmarking, like anytime like Hardware Unboxed or somebody does a video where they benchmark like a whole bunch of GPUs or CPUs, man, the CPU benchmarking, that's even harder actually. GPU benchmarking is easier, but man, like, especially if the game that they're benchmarking has DRM, because like changing the CPU can, depending on the DRM, can lock you out of the game for 24 hours, which is really stupid. I know EA's games do that, which is the reason why I returned Wild Hearts. Anyway, but that's a tangent. The point is, I like making this video despite the fact that it doesn't get a lot of views and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort for not a lot of return. But I like it because these type of videos are useful to the general public long term. So, some DRM use TPM keys? Yeah, maybe. Something like that. All I know is, like, I'll give you guys an example. Dragon's Dogma 2. When I was testing Dragon's Dogma 2, because you guys know I did some videos, I did some CPU comparisons on Dragon's Dogma 2. I did 3800X, 5800X, and 7800X 3D. And there's a limit to 5 CPUs. Steve from Gamers Nexus ran into the same problem. Like, in fact, he actually hit the limit, and they got, like, kicked. They got banned from playing the game for, like, 24 hours. So they had to buy the game, like, on multiple different employees' Steam accounts. It was hilarious how they had to work around it, and then they had to speed run. They had to speed run the game, like, I don't know, like a dozen times or something. It was ridiculous. So I knew not to do more than 5 CPUs, because if I went to 5, I'd get locked out of the game for who knows how long. I think it's like 24 hours. It might have been 48 hours, but it's kind of dumb. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous though with DRM. Anyway, um, yeah, that's Dawntrail though. So very playable for most modern PCs. I mean, you guys can see like the 7600. This is like a $250 GPU. That's doing like 73. So, and that's basically like a 1080 Ti. Or actually, it's a little bit faster than 1080 Ti. 1080 Ti is more like 68 to 70 FPS. It's like slightly better than this 5700 XT. But yeah, so don't need to spend a lot of money. Even Intel can handle the game. Although Intel has graphical bugs though. Like I didn't want to throw Intel under the bus when shooting this video, but Intel has a problem with one of the new shader techniques that the game has. In the benchmark, in a couple of the scenes when there's combat and there's a lot of like spell effects going off, the Intel GPU, instead of the colors for pink and yellow, the colors were white. And I was like, it's so noticeable, especially as someone who benchmarked it on like so many GPUs. When I would see it run on the Intel A750, like the way it was rendering the combat sequence, I was like, wait a minute, is that a spell effect supposed to be that bland white color? That's not right. So, but yeah, that was an Intel rendering bug. So, yeah, and that's the reason why we don't talk too much about Intel GPUs. I don't want to make them look bad, because I feel like the media already kind of like hates on them a lot, and I don't want to draw attention, but they'll probably hopefully fix this. Although it's annoying, because if somebody buys the GPU and then they start playing it with a game like this and they run into that problem, they're going to have to report the bug. And if it's just one, or if it's like, 12 people complaining about it, Intel might fix it later, but it's going to be a low priority for them. So it's just it's not a good thing to be in that situation, but it is what it is. So we'll see what Battlemage does. I will revisit this in the future. Like once Battlemage and RDNA 4 come out, I do plan on getting one of those cards. At least one of them. Probably Battlemage. It depends on what RDNA 4 actually ends up doing. But I will retest this. I will include Dawntrail going forward in my GPU review content. So this is now a staple benchmark for me, for my videos. So it's a very good benchmark. Let's put it that way, because it has 5 different scenes. One scene is very GPU heavy. One scene is very CPU heavy. And then a third scene is like a mix of both. And then the fourth scene, I think, is like a GPU heavy scene. And the last scene, it's like half GPU heavy, half CPU heavy in the same scene. So, meaning there's no load time between it. But there's load times between all 5 scenes. So that's the reason why I consider this benchmark a very thorough benchmark. It's more akin to like a 3D Mark benchmark, as opposed to your typical like Horizon, Zero Dawn benchmark, or those built-in benchmarks that a lot of games have. Because this is not a built-in benchmark. This is a standalone software application that you download separately. It has nothing to do with the game. So just to throw that out there, if people were wondering, the Final Fantasy XIV benchmark is a free-to-download benchmark for everyone. You do not have to be subscribed to Square Enix's MMO to be able to use this benchmark. It's freely available to everyone. It's a very good piece of software. Japanese reviewers, they literally consider this like the holy grail. They only use like Final Fantasy XIV and 3D Mark as their official benchmarks for their review content. So yeah, they don't really use a lot of Western. I mean, there's probably like a few exceptions, but it's usually like, if it's not a built-in benchmark, they don't really use it. So yeah, this one's definitely the gold standard. So that's why I'm calling it out. All right, so that was Final Fantasy. And then we talked about the AGESA updates are starting to roll in. So depending on whatever motherboard you have, if you have MSI or Asus, there's a good chance, and you're on AM5, there's a good chance that there's a new BIOS available that adds support for Zen 5 CPUs now. Like literally now. And the other thing that I want to reiterate, because I know there were people that were not watching when we first talked about this, the Raphael CPUs, aka Ryzen 7000, they have gotten an AGESA update with this new patch. So this new update includes Zen 5 CPU support, aka Granite Ridge, but Raphael, aka Ryzen 7000, is also updated. Something changed in this BIOS. I don't know what. I really dislike how the release notes for BIOS updates is so vague. Like, all it says is, like, this is MSI, this is the ACE. The ACE update literally says, AGESA Combo 1170 Patch A, updated for next gen CPU. Okay, well, that's literally the Granite Ridge, but what actually changed for the Ryzen 7000 series? That's what I would like to know, because that's actually more relevant to me right now. You haven't updated the BIOS a single time. When did you build your PC? Because it depends on when you built the PC. If you built the PC recently, you're probably okay. But if you built the PC like a long time ago, like 2022, there's a lot of good updates since then. So. Playing Forza Motorsport at 1440p. 236. Why 236? Why is that the cap? Oh, that's the game. Is that the game cap? Nero's playing on 1080p, 75 hertz with a 7800 XT. Yeah, that's kind of overkill for 1080p for Final Fantasy at least. Yeah, but if you cap it to the refresh rate of the monitor and you just turn off VSync, wouldn't it be the same? Anyway, so the Ace has it. I know the Carbon Wi-Fi has it. Gigabyte's BIOSes don't have it yet. So Gigabyte is the slow one this time around. Like, they don't have Zen 5 support as of yet. I'm guessing it'll probably be sometime next week, because Asus got theirs literally today. Which is good news, because that means that... Do you know what this means, guys? If the BIOS is available now to the public-facing website, that means Zen 5 is probably like 3 months out. Three to 4 months out. Because if you look at when the 8000 series was added, it was on the MSI one. So MSI added support in October of last year. So right here. Look at this. October 17th of last year. Support AMD Ryzen 8000 series APU. So that was October. The APU came out in January, if I remember correctly. So that was 1, 2... Yeah, it's like 3 months away. So we're looking at sometime in... Well, I mean, I said Q3 last year. So it's still slated for Q3 in terms of release window, based off of what we're seeing here. So I like when stuff like this happens, because this further validates what I said last year. You know, like when you see stuff like this show up, and then you look at the pattern of like when the last update for the last CPU, in this case the Ryzen 8000 series, was added back in October, even though it didn't launch until January. So that shows you, it's like it comes out at the beginning of the quarter before the launch. So the launch is in the following quarter. Support in the existing motherboards is the previous quarter. So this was Q4 23. Launch was Q1 24. So we're getting BIOS support for Zen 5 in Q2. We're getting the launch probably in Q3. So that makes a lot of sense. So the next thing that I expect to start seeing are leaks for the motherboards. The motherboards, so that whatever the new chipset is going to be called, X870, X770, whatever they want to call it, like that's what I expect to start seeing next in terms of leaks, and not even leaks, because this isn't even a leak. They literally just made this a beta BIOS is updated now, and it has support for this CPU. So Zen 5 is on track. That's good to see, because that's the beginning of the end in terms of like hardware launches, right? You're gonna do Zen 5, and then who knows what happens after that. But it's a lot. And then of course Nvidia, I guess in Computex, Nvidia, did Nvidia announce 40 series at the Computex though, like 2 years ago? I don't remember if they did. I don't know when Nvidia started talking about 40 series. I have to go back and look. I don't think they will. Or if they do, it's going to be very understated. Because it's not in their best interest to start talking about 50 series so early. They don't want to. So that leads me to my next story. So it's time to bid farewell to AMD RDNA 2 Radeon RX 6000 GPUs. Inventory hits rock bottom. So remember, guys, I told you guys last year when we were talking about when is the 7800 XT going to come out? When is the 7700 XT going to come out? When we were talking about those GPUs a year ago, I kept saying that they're not going to come out until the inventory for the existing RDNA 2 gets below a certain threshold. And that's the main reason why those GPUs launched so late in the year. And it was because there was so much RDNA 2 inventory that they had to sell through first. And that's the reason why NVIDIA is not going to talk about 50 series at all until they get the 40 series through a certain threshold. It's all about inventory and supply volume. Like, you don't want to be sitting on a whole bunch of inventory of unsold last generation cards, because that's just going to cause problems for you internally, because your partners aren't going to want to buy as many of the new chips, or they're not going to buy as many of the old chips. So you're going to have a bunch of old chip inventory that you're going to have a harder time offloading. So that's the reason why RDNA 2 availability had been easily obtainable pretty much all last year. Even now, depending on where you are, you can still find brand new 6950 XTs at places like a Micro Center. 6700 or 6750 XT also are still readily available in some areas. So until those GPUs are completely gone, I don't think we're going to hear anything about RDNA 4 for the next several months. So what that means is RDNA 4 is probably looking like a Q4 launch window at this point, because now that they're only now getting rid of RDNA 2, that means there's a lot of RDNA 3. So you can't launch RDNA 4 when you have a whole bunch of RDNA 3. See what I'm saying? So now they have a bunch of RDNA 3 that they have to sell through. So we're probably not going to hear anything about RDNA 4 until the end of the year, until Q4. October, November, December, that is when RDNA 4 will probably surface, or at least the rumors will start showing up, or things of that nature. So that's why there's not a lot of info on it, because AMD is staying very tight-lipped because they need to get rid of all their older cards. And RDNA 3 is still extremely viable. 40 series was GTC. Okay. Well, GTC happened. So GTC this year already happened, and they didn't talk about 50 series at all. I mean, I guess they talked about the Blackwell AI thing, but that was it. 6950 XT should have mature drivers as well. Yeah, 6950 XT was one of the GPUs that I tested for Final Fantasy. It did surprisingly well. I mean, I think it did. Didn't it do better than... Yeah, like this GPU, 6950 XT did so good, it actually beat a 3090 Ti. And it normally doesn't even compete with 3090 Ti. It competes with 3080 Ti. Like, that's the correct rival. So, but at 1440p, RDNA 2 is like really, really good at 1440p versus its rival Ampere, aka 30 series. At 4K, the roles get reversed and Ampere pulls ahead. At 4K, the 3080 Ti moves in front of the 6950 XT. This is I always expected this. In fact, I thought this is how it would be at 1440p. So I was surprised. I was surprised when the 6950 XT, not only did it beat a 3080 Ti, it literally beat a 3090 Ti in Final Fantasy at 1440p. That is insane. So speaking of 6950 XT, was very, very impressive. The fact that this card, it's what, like 24 FPS slower than a 7900 XT. Man, this thing beat 3090 Ti. You can tell that 7900 XT was sweating. The 700 XT was sweating when it saw the 6950 XT with that run up. You were gonna buy 6950 XT but decided to get XTX, then had issues with XTX and went 4080. And with FSR3 it's only gotten better. XESS. Yeah, I was actually disappointed in the 4080 Super. At least the Super that I have, I was disappointed in it. Because historically, and I say this in this video, historically, NVIDIA GPUs do very well in Final Fantasy XIV. So, from the beginning, I went in with the assumption that the 4080 Super would be the second fastest GPU in these results. But I was surprised to see the XTX do significantly better than the 4080. The 4080, I was like, wait, what? It's actually closer to the 7900 XT. So here's where the conspiracy theorists and the tinfoil hats, people are going to put on their tinfoil hats and they're going to start saying, hey guys, it's planned obsolescence time. It's NVIDIA with their planned obsolescence. 4080 is getting weaker. You know, so like this is where the conspiracy theorists come in when they see this. It's like, why is it 185? It's like it's all a plan by NVIDIA. It's all a big scheme by NVIDIA to get people to feel the need to upgrade to the 50 series GPUs. I mean, that's the conspiracy theorist viewpoint on this sort of thing. Because I was surprised to see 4080 Super do this bad in this game. Like, I was not impressed with... It's like, oh yeah, it's only 185 FPS. But no, it's only 185 FPS. So very, very disappointing, considering if we were to run the older benchmark, we would see different results. So, did you test on the newest? Yes, this was all done on the latest drivers. So, even at 4K though, it's still lost. Although at 4K, it's closer to the XTX, whereas at 1440p, it was closer to the 7900 XT. So, and here at 4K, the 3090 Ti catches back up to its rival, the 7900 XT. So this is more expected. See, these are more expected results because here the 3080 Ti pulls ahead of the 6950 XT. So, but at 1440p, the AMD cards look really good. The AMD cards look really good at 1440p. there's no difference with the drivers. The Ampere cards and the Ada cards are already like what NVIDIA calls complete. These are complete products. There's no more optimization for drivers for NVIDIA's Ada and Ampere. All of the effort right now is going to Blackwell. It's all internal. None of it's publicly available because none of those products have launched yet. But rest assured, all of NVIDIA's driver, staff, developers, all that stuff, their efforts are all focused on Blackwell and the AI stuff. Like, that's where it's all going. Nobody is paying attention to Ada and Ampere. So we're not going to be seeing any more driver improvements for those GPUs. You had seen the testing person on NVIDIA get lower FPS on the recent driver? Well, I don't think it's going to matter, to be honest. Especially for the Ampere cards. Because the Ampere cards were kind of underperforming in 1440p. Especially the 3090 Ti. The 3090 Ti is losing to a 6950 XT when it typically rivals the 7900 XT. That's what I found the most surprising of all these results. Not only was I disappointed with the 4080 results, I was disappointed with the 3090 Ti results. I was impressed with XTX, especially at 4K, and the reason why I want to say that is because I want to call something out here. So for those that don't know, and I say this in the video, there's a section in the beginning. Basically, if you want to score in the highest category, if you want to be considered extremely high performance, you have to score over 15,000 points. And at 4K, the 7900 XTX barely manages to cross that 15,000 line. It's one of those things where you're like watching like a relay race, and at the very end, the XTX is able to just cross that line and pass. It barely hit over 15K and got that extremely high performance result at 4K max setting. The 4080 Super it fell into the very high category, not the extremely high category. So kind of disappointing, to be honest, in terms of what I saw there. 3090 Ti, whatever. I mean, it's close enough to its rival, and same thing with 6950 XT. It's close enough to its rival that, like, these are this is like a 200-ish point difference. This is a 200-ish point difference. So they're within 200 points of each other, or they're within 200 to 300 points, give or take. So those are rivals. This is why I say these are rivals and these are rivals. Because in a standard rasterization exam, like basically the Final Fantasy XIV benchmark, the scores are so close that you would be hard-pressed to tell the difference if you were looking at them side by side without any FPS counter. So, same thing, even though the XTX did quite a bit better, that's like 800 point difference there, a little bit more than 800 points, it's still close enough that you won't really notice a visual difference between the two. So, yeah, this one is a more noticeable change, because if you go and look at the FPS number, see, we're talking 5 FPS. 5 FPS difference there. These guys are like a 2 or a 1 FPS difference. So that's the difference there. So, and then the 4090 is an interesting one to talk about. Obviously, it's off there by itself. It's all lonely up there at the top of the mountain with no one to talk to. But the thing is, this sort of raises the question as to what will the 5090 do. The RTX 5090 will launch later this year in Q4. So we're only like half a year away from the RTX 5090. How much faster will the 5090 be to justify the increased cost over that. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't. A lot of people are saying that the rasterization uplift won't be as high. There is a difference between what was it? My 4080 did just tiny bit over 17K. Yeah, Matt's right. You're probably not testing it on maximum settings. For some reason, the benchmark, when you first load the benchmark, it defaults to high desktop settings. That is not max settings. So you have to go into the settings and manually select maximum preset, and then you will see the actual maximum results. Basically, at the very end, the way you can tell if someone's on maximum, you look at their screenshot, or they have to show their screenshot of the final score, and it has to say maximum down here. If you look on the lower right of my screen, notice how it says 1440p maximum. If it doesn't say maximum, you're not running it at maximum settings. No, you can't tweak them manually. You have to run it as a preset. As soon as you start tweaking things, that's no longer max settings. You click maximum settings, you click OK, and then you run it. You don't change individual settings. That's going to mess it up, and that makes the score invalid. You can cheat the benchmark and run DXVK translation. I mean, that's cool, but no one really cares, because when you play the actual game on the server, you're connecting to their server, and you're not gonna be able to do. As far as I know, you can't do DXVK. That's interesting, though. It's definitely interesting. I definitely probably would look into that, but that's kind of irrelevant for something like this, because it doesn't tell you how. Like, if you're running the game in DXVK, that's not how the actual game that connects to their servers runs. So, but yeah, that's cool. Thanks for telling me that, because I might actually look into that DXVK translation to see what it does. Because I'll be honest with you guys, I was actually a little bit underwhelmed with Square Enix. I was hoping that they would add, at the very least, a DX12 based client, and they did not deliver on that. This is still an ancient DX11 client. So the DXVK thing is really interesting to me, because I really was hoping, at the very least, we would get a DX12 client, and they did not deliver. I mean, come on, Square. Blizzard and World of Warcraft has been on DX12 for probably the last 2 or 3 expansions now. And it's like, why can't these guys get their act together? And that key discussion point is an excellent segue into a story that just came out today about Japanese developers. So the Nier series creator, for those that don't know, that is Yoko Taro. So this is a Japanese developer himself saying this. So this is not like some Western person saying this. This is a Japanese developer commentating on other Japanese developers, including his own studio. Japanese developers are, quote unquote, not good at adapting technology from overseas, Nier series creator says. So the Nier series creator's name is Yoko Taro. He's a Japanese man, obviously. So, and he's admitting this. He's openly admitting this. So this is a perfect segue, because here I am complaining about Square Enix not giving us a DX12 client after literally the game's been out for like 10 and a half years, and we're still on DX11. And granted, we only got DX11 back in 2015 with the first expansion. So why can't we get a DX12? Like, they did all this work to upgrade the graphics, and it's like we're still stuck on DX11. But this is an interesting story. So since the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, Japanese developers have struggled to keep up with their Western colleagues According to the Near series creator, they are not good at adapting technology from overseas for multiple reasons. Okay, I would like to know what these reasons are, because we've had discussions like this in the past. Like, we've talked about ray tracing and the future of graphics and video games, and the pushback, the argument against ray tracing is because it requires developers to commit. It requires developer buy-in. And ray tracing is a prime example of this issue, assuming we're calling this an issue with Japanese developers. Because, name a Japanese game that has ray tracing, that has a good implementation of ray tracing. Crickets. I hear nothing. Nothing. Can anybody give me a example of a ray tracing game from a Japanese developer? I can think of a couple. You guys aren't going to like the example that I give you, knowing this audience, but I'm going to go and name a few. Dragon's Dogma 2. Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Village. These games have ray tracing. And those are Japanese developed games from Capcom, featuring everybody's favorite RE engine. Sword and Fairy 7 is not a Japanese game. Any RT games I can think of from Japanese are next to useless. Yeah, so, okay, when I hear Japanese game and RT, I think of Resident Evil Village and Dragon's Dogma 2. Like, those are the best examples. Oh, here's another one, guys. Forspoken, everybody's favorite memory overclocking benchmark. Forspoken has ray tracing. Yeah, that's a good one. Forspoken, Dragon's Dogma 2, Resident Evil Village, and Resident Evil 4. Those are Japanese games that feature ray tracing. Now compare that to Cyberpunk RT and Avatar. Okay. To give Square Enix the benefit of the doubt, WoW was made from the ground up for PC only, while Final Fantasy XIV was made for a console that doesn't even support direct. Yeah, that is a very good point. Marcelo's making a very, very good point. But that's specific to Final Fantasy XIV. We're talking about the general, and that's good because that's addressing my complaint about DX12 and Final Fantasy XIV. But that doesn't address the larger picture here. You know what I'm saying? Like, wow. Okay, let's get into this article further. So, discussing game development with Stellar Blade creative director. Now, guys, remember, Stellar Blade is not a Japanese game. This is a Korean game. Completely different. Completely different. Hyung Tae Kim, in a lengthy interview, so this is the director of Stellar Blade, which I will be playing Stellar Blade next week when it comes out. A lengthy interview posted on IGN. Yoko Taro highlighted how it has proven difficult for Japanese developers to implement Western rendering systems. So it's difficult for Japanese developers to implement Western rendering systems. Mostly because they're used to developing their own engines. Okay, now that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Because I actually like when developers use their own engines. I don't like when everyone just copy-pastes UE5 or Unity and just go with that. You know, like, I don't like that. I actually like when developers use their own engines. So they like to develop their own engines, their own tools. Japanese developers were very late with incorporating rendering tools and middleware. Okay, now this is fascinating. This is actually a really good article because we almost never get any info on this sort of thing. Japanese developers are late to incorporate rendering tools and middleware. Middleware, I'll give you guys an example of middleware. Middleware is the black box that NVIDIA gives a developer to turn on DLSS. Or like check the flag to tell the rendering pipeline that when the game runs, turn on the DLSS ML thing on the tensor model. Like have that run. You know, like that's an example of middleware from the West. And even to this day, now here's even more fascinating thing. Many schools in Japan still don't teach this to new developers. So basically, like how to integrate FSR, DLSS, newer ways of doing things in with like upscale, not even upscaling, like how to leverage like GTAO, ambient occlusion, HBAO plus, you know, like even more archaic things, like the middleware, examples of middleware, you know, like anti-aliasing pipeline methods and stuff like that. You know, like these things are not really talked about, or they're not really taught. And that's the reason why you have games that like Elden Ring and Dark Souls and the Zelda games and all these older games, well, not older games, but these games that still run on their own engines, they're homegrown, first party, well, a third party, but it's like Japanese developer made engines. You know, like the best example I can give you that's very, very recent that I'm aware of is Rise of the Ronin. Rise of the Ronin uses Team Ninja's the same exact engine that they use to make like all their Souls-like games. Neo 2, Stranger of Paradise, Wolong Fallen Dynasty, and now Rise of the Ronin. That's literally like 5 games all made off of the same exact engine that they just basically did the bare minimum to iterate off of over the years. So it's like the mentality, and it's not a bad mentality. I'm not trying to like diss Japanese developers or say that they're not good. All I'm saying is I'm pointing out, as this article is pointing out, that they're kind of set in their ways. They'll build an engine from scratch themselves rather than license one from someone else, like Unreal Engine, for example. They'll build a game and they'll build an engine. It'll take them years to build an engine. Then they will they'll make a bunch of games off of this one engine over, and they'll iterate off of that for years. Best example I can give you that everyone's probably aware of is RE Engine from Capcom. All the modern Resident Evil remakes, even the Resident Evil 7 on the PlayStation 4, Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 4 remake, and the recent Dragon's Dogma 2, all of these games are using the exact same engine that they built literally probably more than a decade ago. They were probably working on RE Engine. In fact, maybe Resident Evil 6 might be on that engine. So this engine's old. It's like more than 10 years old. So people complaining about Dragon's Dogma 2 running like garbage on whatever CPU they have, you know, it's not really the fault of the CPU. That's just how the engine is, right? It's like it's a super old engine. You can't really do much about it. So maybe Zen 5. I mean, X3D kind of fixes the problem. It does a very good job masking the CPU bottleneck, but you're just gonna need better hardware to just brute force its way through it. So that's all there is to it. But yeah, like Nero's saying, many of them love to just build from the ground up. Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's just how it is. So, this is interesting that the schools don't teach how to integrate like middleware and incorporate modern rendering tools. I wonder like how like a computer science student in Japan, like, do they learn about like Scrum Master and Agile model. Do they even teach stuff like that? I guess they do. I don't know why they wouldn't, but it's just interesting to think about stuff like that. In general, Yoko Taro feels that Japanese developers are not good at adapting technology from overseas, while Chinese and South Korean developers are much faster at using engines like Unreal for games with, okay, here's the weird part. He says Japanese aesthetics. Now, I like this because this is debatable. This can probably trigger like Chinese and South Korean developers, but at the same time, depends on who you are, like the viewpoint you take on this. But here we have a Japanese developer claiming that he's basically complimenting Chinese and South Korean developers at being faster at adopting Western techniques for video game development. But then he claims that they're making games with Japanese aesthetics. I find that slightly amusing because I feel like if we were to look at the point of view from a South Korean developer or a Chinese developer, they might not consider that Japanese aesthetics. They might consider it their own native aesthetics. So that's kind of weird of him to claim that. I mean, I can kind of see the argument because all those Chinese gacha games, they look, I mean, the fact they look like anime, that's basically what he means by Japanese aesthetic, I assume. But the Chinese might beg to differ in that regard. South Korean I don't agree. I don't agree with him. I don't think Korean games look anything like Japanese games. Like, there's a huge difference in Korean art style and aesthetics compared to Japanese. So I think, like, when he says Japanese aesthetics, maybe he's referring to Chinese gacha games. I don't think the Korean games are using Japanese aesthetics, but I could be wrong. That's a very subjective statement. So, I can't even get a proper computer science education where I live, so I don't know much beyond what is probably already known. Yeah, I feel like the integrating middleware is interesting. This is very interesting, guys, because this kind of sheds light on why when games like Dragon's Dogma and Elden Ring come out, the general public perceives them as unoptimized. I hate that phrase, unoptimized. It's lacking optimization. Like, from the Japanese developer's perspective, they don't think that's true. Like, they think that it's either incorrect expectations of people in the West or something like that. I don't know exactly. Maybe not Western people specifically, but it's definitely not how they themselves perceived it. Because the thing about Japanese developers, they will not release a product if they consider it unfinished or poor performing. They don't do that. They will never release a game in the condition that Cyberpunk released in when it first launched back in 2020. Because Cyberpunk's launch was so bad. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was so bad that Sony had to pull Cyberpunk from the PlayStation Store. That's how bad it was at launch. Capcom will never do that. Like, stuff like that would never get past their QA. So the fact that people are complaining about Dragon's Dogma being unoptimized, they don't see it that way. Like, the Japanese developers don't see it that way. So there's a good chance that we won't see any optimization on Dragon's Dogma for at least 6 months. So if you are hoping that Dragon's Dogma 2 performance is going to improve, don't hold your breath. Don't wait around for something that was never promised. That's all I'm saying. So, but this is a very interesting story or article. While many Japanese developers definitely struggled with a proprietary engine, such as Square Enix, with the Luminous engine, everybody's favorite engine, Forspoken, Final Fantasy 15, Final Fantasy 16. Although I don't know if 16 is actually using Luminous. I think it's like some weird one-off or something. But yeah, that's the Forspoken engine, for those that were wondering. Square Enix with the Luminous engine, which was used for only 2 games, mainly Final Fantasy 15 and Forspoken, before getting shelved. Other developers have developed great engines, such as Capcom, with everybody's favorite, including one of my favorite engines of all time, the RE engine. Yes, the RE engine is so good. Look at Dragon's Dogma 2 and that Vernworth experience. It's so good. All those Resident Evil remakes. Devil May Cry 5. It's so good. Which powers diverse games as multiple... Yeah, here we go. Monster Hunter Rise. Resident Evil. Devil May Cry 5. Street Fighter 6. Dragon's Dogma 2. Now that's a good one. RE Engine is so good. With Unreal Engine 5 setting a new benchmark for visual quality, it will be interesting to see if Japanese developers will use it to power their future games, or if any proprietary engine will be able to match its quality. So I want to say one thing about UE5. I don't have a problem with more developers licensing UE5. It's just every time a game comes out and it's using UE5, the track record of UE5 is not really that good. All I'm saying is UE5, it's going to be a couple of years before we finally see games that come out on UE5 that the general gaming public doesn't complain about day one, with the words needs optimization. Like, there is one game I can think of that does run well, and it's UE5. And ironically enough, it's from a Japanese developer. Do you guys know what game I'm thinking of? What's a Japanese game that launched earlier this year that uses Unreal Engine 5 that actually runs really well, although it is pretty demanding at max settings, especially at 4K native? You guys know what game I'm talking about? Let's see if the chat knows what game I'm talking about. UE5 Japanese developed game. Came out in 2024. It's a few months old at this point. I covered it earlier this year. Granblue, that's a good guess. That's not correct, but the game that the correct answer came out very, very close to Granblue. In fact, it was like the same exact day. It's not Granblue Fantasy. Granblue Fantasy is using some weird... I think Granblue Fantasy is using... what is the engine? I don't even know what that engine is. I know it's not UE5. It's some kind of custom engine. I forgot. It's like Cygames engine. I don't know. Lords of the Fallen is not a Japanese game. That was last year. Persona... I'm pretty sure Persona 3 Reload is not UE5. It's funny, you guys mentioned the games that came out like right around the same time that this one game came out. Marcelo got it. Tekken 8, guys. Tekken 8. Tekken 8 is a UE5 Japanese developed game. And it runs so well. It is like the best running UE5 game I have ever played. And sure enough, a Japanese developer made it, and they didn't release it in a garbage state like all the other UE5 games that I've played. So, Tekken 8. Tekken 8 is UE5. And it is a good running and good looking UE5 game at that. Yeah, Persona 3 Royal, that's UE4. Yeah, that's why that was not UE5. But that's a super old game, just remastered. But yeah, like, so Lords of the Fallen that's a European studio. I forget where they're located, but that's definitely like a European game. I really like Lords of the Fallen, but that game is so incredibly hard to run. Like, if you're playing Lords of the Fallen, not even an RTX 4090 can handle that game at 4K resolution. Like, I have to turn on DLSS, and when I'm playing it on an XTX, I have to turn on FSR to play Lords of the Fallen. That's an example of a UE5 game that has good visuals, but it's so hard to run. Immortals of Avium, same deal. It's so hard to run at native resolution. So, because guys, look, from my perspective, and I feel like a lot of game developers, if they ever watch this live stream in post, they're probably going to agree with what I'm saying. Because when I say UE5 is so hard to run, my definition is 4K native resolution versus RTX 4090, or 1440p native resolution versus 7800 XT. That is the perspective. That is where a developer will also be looking at that perspective. They will look at that resolution and they will automatically think, okay, that GPU. They are never going to look at 1440p and think, oh, I need to optimize that so the 4090 can run that. That's not how they do things. That's just not how it works. They're going to look at that and they're like, okay, I need to optimize it so that the 4070 can run it at that resolution. That's how it's done. That's why market segmentation exists. Because certain amount of pixels require certain amount of GPU horsepower in terms of how best to render them. So like I said, the only UE5 game that I've played that actually runs properly, or it performs at like a proper frame rate, all maxed out at the correct resolution for the correct graphics card for that resolution, is Tekken 8, which happens to be a Japanese developed game. If the 4070 or PS5 Pro can run it well, though, yeah, but they may still end up having to use upscaling. Because you gotta remember, like, anytime you start talking about consoles is gonna get really different because of the unified architecture, and the power limit is much lower on a console. So it's not exactly the same comparison. But yeah, in general, like the console, I feel like developers, when they're developing a game for the PlayStation 5, they target 1080p, and then that's the reason why that's why the upscaling implementations are so bad. Because the console is marketed as a 4K gaming device, but the hardware is not powerful enough to handle 4K resolution. At least the rendering pipeline is definitely lacking. It's severely lacking. It's so underpowered. And the other thing too that I've noticed recently, when a game comes out and people complain about optimization issues, it's not optimization issues. It's just the fact that the hardware is just too weak. You know, the other thing is the hardware is just straight up too weak. Like, people who make this argument saying the PS5 still has untapped potential. That's not true. In some cases, maybe it is true to a degree, but the reality is the PS5 is old. It's not, there's nothing left in the tank. Like, you're not gonna optimize your game to look significantly better, turn on RT, and then have it like run at like 60 frames per second on a PS5. It's just not gonna happen. You know, like, so people talking about, oh, it has untapped potential, the developers have to optimize. No, it's maxed out, guys. Like, the PS5 can't get any better than it already is. Like, I realized this when I was playing Horizon Forbidden West on the PS5. When I got it on PC, I was like, man, okay, now it actually can run at 60 FPS in the 4K mode. On the console, it was like 30 FPS if you wanted to play it on the 4K mode. So, and that's optimizing as best as they can. That's optimizing. Like, to be able to get what essentially is a 5700 XT or a 6700 to render to 4K, 30 FPS is going to be the target for the visuals that they're looking for. You can't get behind the idea of Zen 2 and the PS5. Well, let's forget about the CPU for a second because we're really talking about graphics power, like GPU rendering power. And anytime people keep saying like, "Oh, the PS5, it's the developer's fault because the PS5 has untapped potential. They didn't optimize for the PS5." That's not true. They already did their due diligence, unless the game just launches as a buggy mess, the way Cyberpunk did when it launched. Or I guess Lords of the Fallen was also really buggy when it first launched, but it wasn't like that bad. It didn't have broken AI and weird artifacting and glitching and stuff like that. But it did have a lot of issues with stuff getting broken later on, like the further you play the game. But anyway, the point is, the console's old. Same thing with Xbox Series X. Like Xbox Series X and PS5, they're old. They're not fast anymore. Technology improves so quickly. Well, not as quickly as before, but it still improves every 2 years. Like Moore's Law used to be 12 to 18 months. Now it's more like 24 to 32 months. It's like it's different now. So, yeah, pretty much every 2 years, you get a new graphics card generation and a new CPU generation. So that's why you don't need hardware leaks to know this. Like, Zen 4 Ryzen 7000 was 2022. It was September 2022. 2 years later, here we are. 2 years later, it's time for Zen 5. See, so it's everything changes every 2 years. So 4090 was Q4 2022. 2 years later, here we are. 5090's on the way. So it's the same thing. So the console, PS5 and Xbox Series X, was fall Q4 2020. That's almost 4 years old. The consoles are almost 4 years old at this point. So they're old. They're like 2 generations old at this point. RDNA 2 technology. You know, and that's not even like the highest end of RDNA 2. So just that puts things into perspective. So the people that say that the PS5 like it has untapped potential, no, it's done. Like, it's already underpowered. Why do you think Sony's made a PS5 Pro? Because the PS5's underpowered, and it's old. So, that's where we're at. But yeah, this was an interesting story. Probably the most interesting one of the entire live stream, if I'm being honest. Because we rarely ever hear about, we rarely gain insight into this. So now I know schools don't teach how to integrate middleware for video game design to developers in Japanese schools. That's very interesting. They should go back to building the consoles with booster packs or a module-based platform where you would go. Yeah, you know, like how the PS2 had an expansion bay. That reminds me of external graphics cards, eGPUs over Thunderbolt. Yeah, stuff like that. Can you imagine, like have the PlayStation 5 have like a bolt-on add-on thing that you connect on the back or something, and it has its own little like grill for its blower fan or whatever, and like or it's like you take the old one out, you put the new one in. You know, like, and then that's how you increase the power. You upgrade the console quite literally. eGPU over Thunderbolt 4 would work, right? Well, what do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean? Would it work? It would work. That's how it works. What is that? Is that supposed to be a question? It also works over USB 4. Just saying. You don't actually need Thunderbolt. You can use USB 4 for an eGPU. As long as your chipset supports that. And we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. We're going to shift over to motherboards soon. That's going to be the next topic. It's interesting because compared to past generations, this one probably has the most amount of games that run at 60. Yeah, and that's a good point. That's a good point. With this generation of hardware, I have not seen. I will say this. I agree with you. The Xbox Series X and the PS5 generation of consoles have the most games that I've ever seen that actually have a performance mode toggle, a 60 FPS mode. There were a handful in the last couple of years of the PS4 generation, and that's mainly because of the PS4 Pro. It is really the PS4 Pro that enabled that 60 FPS mode in a lot of games toward the end of that generation. So now with the PS5 getting a Pro version, I feel like that will make the 60 FPS mode look better. And I guess if someone wants to play the 30 FPS mode, they could make the 30 FPS mode probably turn on ray tracing or something. If someone wanted to take like screenshots or something, like they wanted to go into photo mode, they could turn on the graphics mode, turn on all the RT to get screenshots. Maybe something like, I could see reviewers for games doing stuff like that. Wait, what? Oh, you're talking about Thunderbolt? Yes, it will. You have to remember, now it's not going to take the full 16. So you got to remember, Thunderbolt. Hold on, where is it? You have to remember Thunderbolt spec. Thunderbolt 4 is PCIe 3.0 x4. This is the specification for the PCIe tunneling. So it's 4 lanes of Gen 3 PCIe. So if you connect an external graphics card over Thunderbolt 4, this is what your graphics card will run at. 4 lanes of PCI Gen 3. That's what you get for external GPU. Now, there is one change that's coming up here with USB 4. USB 4, now here's the thing. USB 4 is supposed to increase this to PCI Gen 4 X4. 4 lanes of PCI Gen 4. Now this is basically double the PCIe 3.0 X4. So it remains to be seen like what the actual chipset will feature. So this is a good segue into talking about Zen 5 and the upcoming motherboards, specifically the new motherboards, because one of the things that exists today, if you're using AM5, and this is also true for Intel, if you have a motherboard that features Thunderbolt 4, or if you're on AMD and it advertises USB 4 today, if it's like for example, I'll give you guys an example. The X670E ProArt Creator from Asus, the X670E Tai Chi from ASRock, the B650E Tai Chi from ASRock. All of these motherboards, or the X670E Crosshair Hero and the Crosshair Extreme, all of these motherboards already include USB 4. However, the USB 4 implementation is actually Thunderbolt 4, which means that they're limited to PCIe 3.0 X4 because the chipset uses PCIe 3.0 X4, which means even if the motherboard manufacturer internally solders or takes 4 lanes of PCIe 4 or PCIe 5, as soon as they wire it up to the Thunderbolt chipset, the Thunderbolt chipset is only able to handle PCI Gen 3 X4. So it basically downgrades the entire link to PCI Gen 3, no matter what. So this is the maximum bandwidth that you can get out of all these existing motherboards on the market today. Now, what's going to change is the addition of true USB 4. Well, I don't want to say true USB 4. It's more like USB 4 2.0. I don't think there's going to be any weird name. Like, I don't expect anyone to be saying USB 4 Gen 2.2 or, you know, like, you know how there's USB 3.2 Gen 1 or USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2 or USB 3.2 Gen 2. There's all those like ridiculous confusing names for the different USB 3 versions. There's 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, and 3.2 X2 or 2 by 2. You know what I mean? Like, it sounds so dumb to say all of those different things. But USB 4 does have the potential to support twice the bandwidth of Thunderbolt 4. So that allows bi-directional 40 gig for a total of like up to 80 gig. So I don't think any of the chipsets will actually do 80 gig. I expect them to all be 40 gig bidirectional. So yeah, that's the major change that we're going to be seeing with the upcoming motherboards. For the ones that choose to support USB 4, because not all motherboards had USB 4 with the previous generation. You know, only like a certain few had that, and those tend to be more expensive motherboards. Now, there were a lot of motherboards that supported an add-in card, and I've got a couple of YouTube videos that even show how to do the whole add-in card thing. Like if you wanted to add an external GPU, if you wanted to do just anything that's Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4, I've got a couple of videos that I did, I think, late 2022, early 2023, somewhere in that time frame that covered this specific topic. So I'm well versed in this sort of thing. But what I will say is, if you're waiting to upgrade this summer, I would wait for whatever it ends up being called. So let's just assume that it's X670E or B870 or B850E. Assuming they continue to use the extreme branding. It's like, I assume that the name is going to be something like 800 series chipset or 700 series chipset. They may just skip 700 and just go straight to 800 for whatever reason. So I would just wait for these at this point, because most likely they'll have better BIOS support day one. All the kinks with the AGESA code, the MCR, all that stuff will have already been resolved. So I think rather than buying an older board, I would just buy a new one, especially if you're someone who's thinking of upgrading all the way, like from some ancient Zen 2 or Zen 1 or maybe even like a Skylake or something like from way back. Like if your PC is 9 years old and you're thinking of upgrading, if it's that old, you might as well just wait a few more minutes or a few more months and then consider the upgrade, because there's a lot of interesting options. Mainly because you're going to benefit from having the option for these newer standards rather than having to be on older standards. So just keep that in mind. Wait, what are we talking about? You're going for the ARC A770? Why? For what? You want to run... Oh, for eGPU? Is this about the eGPU with USB 4? All right, here's a new, I guess, back to GPUs again. I just briefly. So NVIDIA's GPUs power Meta's next-gen Llama 3 model, optimized AI across all platforms, including RTX. What's the point of mentioning the RTX? I don't get that. Is this like an AI thing? NVIDIA has announced that Meta Llama 3's LLMs were built with NVIDIA GPUs and are optimized to run across all platforms. Oh, is this like an NVIDIA Grid thing? Like, are they doing NVIDIA Grid? Is Meta hosting the NVIDIA Grid? I'm not sure what that's about. Okay, here's a gaming related article. So Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut for PC now has official system requirements. So here they are. The requirements for Ghost of Tsushima. For very low 720p 30 FPS, you will need a Core i3 Kaby Lake or a Zen 1 Ryzen 3. So first generation Ryzen or a Kaby Lake, which is a 7th gen Intel i3. I don't even know how many cores that has. I think it's like 2 cores with hyperthreading, so 4 threads total. Or maybe it's 3 core or something like I don't remember how the i3 was set up in those days. NVIDIA GeForce GTX 960. Notice how they specifically call out the 4GB 960, because remember, the GTX 960 is a 2GB graphics card from early 2015, like January 2015, if I remember correctly. And that was originally a 2GB GPU. So they are recommending for the minimum, for very low, 4GB 960 or an AMD Radeon RX 5500 XT. 8 gigs of memory, 75 gigs of hard drive space, and they recommend SSD. If you don't have an SSD, you're probably going to have 3-minute load times for the initial load, with additional 30 to 45-second load times between map changes. Windows 10, 64-bit minimum for everything, for all of these, regardless of resolution, regardless of settings. I feel like most people are probably going to be playing this on Windows 11. The GTX 960 is 78% slower than a 5500 XT. What about the 4GB? I think it is 2-core. I think it's a dual core. Yeah, I think this Core i3 is a dual core. Okay, that's 720p 30. Okay, keep in mind, this is 720p 30 frames per second, not 60. This is not 60. This is not 720p 60. This is 720p 30 at the very lowest settings. I think. When I say they say preset. Preset means they click a button very low, and that's it. And they're at this resolution. So very low 30 FPS, GTX 960, a dual core processor. That sounds atrocious. I think the Ryzen 3, I don't even know how many cores the Ryzen 3 1200 has. Is that a quad core, or is that like a dual core or something? I didn't even know there was dual core Ryzen CPUs. I don't even know what that is. All right, medium 1080p 60. Okay, this is like literally the majority of people that are gonna play this game. What I find annoying about these charts, I don't like how they show, or these tables, I don't like how they say, okay, it's 1080p 60 medium. Okay, what about 1080p max? What about 1080p very high preset? Like, I don't like when they change the preset and then also change the resolution, because that makes it much harder to guarantee or I guess estimate what the performance is going to be like. It's a 4-core 4-thread. Okay. And the Intel's a 2-core 4-thread. So they're both 4-thread. Yeah, okay, so this one for 1080p 60 on medium preset, you need to either have a Coffee Lake i5 or a Zen 2 Ryzen 5. So what's hilarious is this is the CPU. The 3600 is the CPU that Digital Foundry uses for all their comparison videos. And it just lines up perfectly with the medium 1080p preset. It's hilarious. And the funny thing is, the 2060 is the GPU that they use. So this is literally, this table was tailor-made for Digital Foundry. Like, it's literally made for Digital Foundry. The fact that the 1080p 60 medium lines up perfectly with the Ryzen 5 3600 and the GeForce RTX 2060. That's hilarious. That's so ironic. And then the Radeon equivalent 5600 XT. 16 gigs of RAM. So once you go up to 16 gigs of RAM, they don't actually increase the RAM, the system memory requirement. Although I still consider 16 gigabytes of RAM the bare minimum. 32 gigabytes would be more of the recommended. For 1440p 60 FPS or 4K 30 FPS, it's interesting how they actually have two different resolutions and two different FPS figures listed under high. So for this, they're saying that you will need 11th gen Rocket Lake. Oh boy, everybody's favorite Rocket Lake. Rocket Lake or a Zen 3. Those are very similar actually. A 5600 non-X. And for the GPU, an RTX 3070 or a Radeon RX 6800. Isn't the 6800 more like a 3070 Ti? Like, this is kind of weird. Yeah, like the 5500 and the 960, that's bizarre. And then this one's also kind of mismatched. Although this one is also kind of mismatched. We'll get into that shortly. So it looks like a lot of people... I'm going to go ahead and say that most people are not going to have any problems playing this game at 1080p. Anywhere from like 1080p medium to 1080p very high, I feel like a lot of different people with a lot of different hardware configurations will be able to play this game just fine if they're on a 1080p monitor. Where it gets more interesting is 1440p. Now they're saying high settings, 6800. But what about very high settings for 1440p? Is that going to be like a 6800 XT or a 7800 XT? You know, that'd be interesting to know. And then finally, very high 4K 60 FPS. CPU requirements don't change. They basically carry over from 1440. And that makes sense because at the higher resolution, you're more GPU bound. So that's why this doesn't actually change. So basically, Zen 3, AM4 is really all you need. You don't even need X3D, according to this. Although I think X3D would help. I don't think it's necessary. And then NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4080 or an AMD Radeon RX 7900 XT. 1070 Ti with a CPU that's there on the game is fine then. For 1080p, yes, Shadow, you can play this game at 1080p with a 1070 Ti. Yes. Because the RTX 2060 and the yeah, that's about right. 5600 I think is kind of, yeah, this is about right. These are kind of like a 1070 Ti. So you can do 1080p medium preset with that GPU. Medium, not high, not very high, medium. If you go up to high, you're going to start going below 60 FPS at 1080p with that GPU. That GPU is kind of like this GPU. So, yeah. But yeah, 4K is kind of weird. They have the 4080 paired up with 7900 XT. Okay. 16 gigabyte GPU and 20 gigabyte GPU. I do plan on playing this game on PC, so I will be covering Ghost of Tsushima on PC next month. That being said, this will be the last game that you guys will see me cover before there's a massive shift in the gaming focus on this channel. So there's only one other game. So for those that are new to the channel, we will be covering Stellar Blade next week. And after Stellar Blade, the only other game will be Ghost of Tsushima, which is basically what we're talking about right now. And then after that, Shadow of the Erdtree for Elden Ring. The Elden Ring DLC comes out after Ghost of Tsushima. And then right after that, we go into Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. And that will be pretty much it in terms of the gaming coverage for this channel for this year, unless there's like maybe Black Myth Wukong, maybe World of Warcraft, The War Within. I don't know. I'm not 100% on WoW yet if I'm going to cover their expansion. But I will definitely maybe consider it. But it's going to be way later in the year because WoW's expansions are typically Q4. But yeah, Dawntrail. After Dawntrail, the focus on gaming will take a massive dip in terms of coverage. Like, I'm going to shift focus from gaming back to PC hardware. Because think about when that lines up. We have Computex. So this is how it's going to play out. So let's bring up Paint so those that are watching can keep track of like how my thought process for this is going to go. So let's remove all of this stuff. So we are in April. So what do we have in April? We have like Stellar Blade. And that's basically it. Like that's it. That's all there is. I mean, unless you guys want to see more Dragon's Dogma content. So there's like Dragon's Dogma 2, Stellar Blade, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I still need to finish this game. But I don't know if I'm going to finish this game on stream. I might just finish this game off stream and it'll just quietly go away. So you may not even see anything with that. But Dragon's Dogma 2, Stellar Blade, like this is it. That's all there is. Oh, and I guess like Star Rail, just to put a third bullet point. So notice that there's no hardware content. So we're kind of in a content drought, if you will, for computer hardware. There's really nothing to talk about except talk again and again about Zen 5 because that's like the next thing that's coming up. You know, the GPU stuff is like way further out unless Battle Mage decides to make a surprise appearance in Q3. So that's April. Then we have May. May is going to be not even any different, if I'm being honest. We get Ghost of Tsushima PC. Like, that's it. That's like the one game. That's why I'm saying, like, this is the last thing that I'll be covering for, like, the gaming stuff before we go back into regurgitating, like, games that already exist. Like Final Fantasy and Elden Ring. The new Thermaltate cooler is kind of mid-tier, worse than previous. That's about it. Yeah, I saw the review for that. Hardware Connects did a really good review. I think their review was probably the best one, although Tech Power Up has a good written review. The results are so different, I don't know who to believe. So, Thermal Right, I have no idea who to believe. But that is very relevant. We are going to talk about something. I just figured out what I want to talk about next. We're going to talk about CPU mining. We're going to talk about CPU mining next. Because that's exactly what people want to talk about on this channel. Okay, Ghost of Tsushima. What else is... Like, there's nothing, guys. There's literally nothing. I'm grasping at straws for content right here. So, Ghost of Tsushima PC. And, that's it. Like, that's it. Wow. That's okay. Yeah. That's May. That's May. It's literally like one thing. Okay. June. June is where things are interesting if you're someone who plans on resubbing to Final Fantasy because, well, okay, there's one big thing in June. Computex. I wish, like, Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, ASRock, Sapphire, Power Color, Galax, PNY. I would say EVGA, but I'm not sure. I wish one of those guys, or maybe NVIDIA or AMD or Intel, but they don't really care. I wish one of the AIBs would sponsor me to go to Taipei to attend Computex. Because I feel like that would be really fun. Man, that would be like real fun. I would jump at the opportunity to do that. Like 100%. Like that is the big event of the year. If you are someone who likes PC hardware, if you're someone who is into GPUs, CPUs, overclocking, undervolting, motherboards, power supplies, computer cases, RGB goodness, RGB badness, LEDs, everything, chillers, delidding, high-end monitors, OLED, you name it, Computex has got you covered. This is the show. This is the event. CES happens, so we get, for those that don't know, there are two big events. For people who like computer hardware, there are two big events every year. One in January, the other in June. The January event is called CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. That takes place in America at the beginning of the year. It's like the first full week after the new year. And that one is more for, I hate to use this word, but that's more like the normie audience. So that one is more about like LED technology, OLED technology. It's mostly focused on display technology more than anything else. And then mobility and things like that. Like a lot of smartphones might get shown off, like the latest Samsung, the latest TV stuff, the Bravias, the LGs, the Apple mobility stuff, like the cloud, IoT. That's sort of what you see at CES. It's more like the mainstream, casual, tech person, like that sort of crowd. The sort of stuff that you see on channels like MKBHD. Like Marcus, his content is really, really top tier, but his stuff is more focused on the crowd that gravitates to the CES sort of event. But if you're someone who is hardcore enthusiast, like if you consider yourself any degree of enthusiast when it comes to PC DIY, Computex is the event you want to pay attention to. Computex is where it's at. This is where the real deal happens. This is the real show. This is the big boys show for PC. This is where the GPUs show up. This is where the motherboards for the next upcoming Zen 5 start showing up. This is where all your new CPU announcements, all your new GPU motherboards, the next gen power supplies, any sort of change to PCIe spec, all that kind of stuff. Computex is where it's at. So if you're new to this sort of hobby, you're going to want to pay attention to what's happening in June, because Computex is going down in June, and that is when we're going to get our big updates for all the upcoming like hardware releases for the second half of the year. So that's happening in the very beginning of June. I think it's like the first week of June, or the end of May, bleeding into June. You guys can check. I don't know the exact dates yet, but I know it's in early June. So after that, we have more gaming stuff. Shadow of the Erd Tree is coming in June. You know what's funny? I think IGN or somebody, or Skill Up, one of the like the gaming YouTube channels or media outlets raised the question. They raised a very bizarre question. Can a DLC win Game of the Year? Like, this question came up recently. Can a DLC win Game of the Year? They're hinting at the fact that Shadow of the Erdtree might be so good that it just straight up wins the entire Game of the Year. I don't think that this should be allowed. I personally, even though, now keep in mind, guys, I am a huge fan of Elden Ring, of From Software. Like, I automatically buy all their games no matter what. It doesn't matter how trash the game is, supposedly. I end up buying the game. Like, I see From Software, I buy the game. So it's like that meme, shut up and take my money. That's basically me and From Software when it comes to a From Software game. So that being said, I am of the opinion that a DLC, no matter how good, should not be allowed to be a contender for Game of the Year. Nero saying CP27. Yeah, but that's not Game of the Year. See, that's a specific award. I'm talking about the Game of the Year award. Like the best Game of the Year award. Like the full award. No. I don't think Shadow of the Erdtree, I don't think any DLC should be allowed to be considered for Game of the Year. Like, that to me is unfair. It's just straight up unfair. So I don't think, regardless of how good this is, I don't think this should be allowed. After Overwatch won it back in 2016, anything is possible. Yeah, but that was, well, I see what you're saying there. That's kind of funny. That's kind of funny. Yeah, I don't think a DLC should be Game of the Year. Even if it's technically better than Dragon's Dogma, or because see, the thing is, Final Fantasy is so good, but the sales numbers are not that great. And the only reason why Final Fantasy's sales numbers are not that good is because it's on PlayStation 5 as an exclusive. Like, if it was on other platforms, like, okay, let's put it this way. If Final Fantasy VII Rebirth launched on, or okay, was multi-plat day one, it would be Game of the Year. Like, literally, you'd hear about it more. Like, you heard a lot about this game when it first came out, but after like the first 2 weeks, the media like kind of stopped talking about it. You know, like when Helldivers 2 came out, when Palworld Early Access came out. Now Palworld's not going to be considered because it's an early access. You can't consider an early access for Game of the Year. Like, that's just how it goes. But when Palworld came out, it was talked about for like a month. It was talked about for at least like 3 to 4 weeks. You know, before you finally stopped hearing about it. But that's because it was on a platform that had a much higher user base than what Final Fantasy VII Rebirth launched on. Because this was a PS5 exclusive, I feel like it sort of it kneecapped itself, because if it was on PC and Xbox day one, you know, I think that it would definitely be probably the front runner for Game of the Year, if I'm being honest. So I think this one's definitely, like, I don't care how good Shadow of the Erdtree is. I think it's a DLC. Like, that goes against principles. Like, that can't be Game of the Year. Like, it's a DLC, guys. Come on. Like, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Dragon's Dogma and Helldivers 2 are kind of like the front runners right now. So what if the DLC surprises everyone and ends up being bad? I don't know, man. That'll be very surprising. The probability of that happening is so low. Given From Software's track record, the likelihood of that happening is very unlikely. And I'm trying to say this as unbiased as possible. Like, you look at From Software's track record, it's so solid that it's very hard to bet against them. Remakes of games as well shouldn't count either, like Dead Space, for example. Well, see, I don't know if I agree with that. Because, so here's the thing. Dead Space is a remake of a PS3 game, but when you look at the way Dead Space was remade, it's almost like frame for frame, it plays the same, it's the same style. They both have shooter mechanics. They both have like over-the-shoulder camera angle. They both have the exact same puzzles, everything. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth it's not the same. So, do I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth should be disqualified because it's technically a remake of a really old game? No. I think Final Fantasy VII Remake is significantly different in its approach to Final Fantasy VII. The gameplay is different. They actually changed the story. The sequence of events are different. So even if you know the full story of the original, they change it up in such a way that you don't actually know the sequence of events and how they'll actually play out. Because they've made enough changes to the story with this retelling of the original story that I think it's original enough that it is a contender for Game of the Year. As far as I'm concerned, you're gonna see it as a contender. I don't know if it's gonna win, but I think it's gonna be on that list of candidates. So it's different enough from the PS1 original that it will show up on the list. So the other one is here. Okay, I guess. Well, let's just put this here. So my Game of the Year candidate list as of April. So this is, I'll just do my list, and then you guys can tell me if you think some games should be added or whatever. But this is what I think. So I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Helldivers 2, and Dragon's Dogma 2 are the three current... Oh, well, you know what? If we're going to add a fourth one, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. That one's another really good one. The only problem with this one is I feel like this one has too small of a fan following. I don't know what their total sales figures are, but I have a feeling that the total number of sales of Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, despite the fact that this is a multi-platform game, I think the sales of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth alone on the PS5 exclusive sales of Rebirth, I think are more than the total sales of Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. So Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth is available on the consoles and PC. But I think even despite that, I think Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has outsold all versions of Like a Dragon at this point. I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if I'm correct. That being said, this game is a very good game. The quality of this game is good. The story of this game is good. The combat system is hilarious. There's a lot of stuff to like if you like RPGs. And it seems so non-traditional in its approach to gameplay that I feel like a Dragon definitely, considering the lack of games this year compared to last year, let's put it this way. If Spider-Man 2 can be on the list of contenders for Game of 2023, then Like a Dragon can be on the list for 2024. I feel like that's fair. That's a fair assessment. Now that you're listing the heavy hitters, is there even enough games this year? I mean, that's why these sort of games are ending up on the list. See, because typically it's what, 5-6 candidates? 5-6 candidates. So I've already listed like 4 potential candidates. I left some spots open. You know, like, do I think Tekken 8 should be on the list? No. Even though I like Tekken 8. I think Tekken 8 is definitely the best fighting game of the year, but I don't think it's the best game of the year. Do I think Grand Blue Fantasy Relink should be on the list? No. There's too many flaws with the game. The game's story is very bland and no one cares about it. It's very forgettable. The post-game content is literally where all the fun is. Basically, the entire trek through the story is boring. So that and Infinite Wealth and Final Fantasy are the complete opposite of that. So that's the reason why Grand Blue is not on this list. Persona 3 Reload, someone might argue, okay, well, if I'm putting this on the list, why am I not including Persona 3 Reload? Because Persona 3 Reload is literally just the exact same game. Like, you guys don't understand. Like, those who played Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 1, they know that Rebirth is different enough from the original game that it stands alone as a separate product. They know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, Final Fantasy VII should be on the list. There's not enough games for the other categories. Will Tekken 8 be alone? Probably. Unless there's some kind of, like, mobile fighter or some other 2D fighter or something. I feel like every game this year has been only Asian-inspired style games. Asian-inspired style games? Helldivers 2? Helldivers 2 is like, hold my beer. Same thing with Dragon's Dogma 2. I know Dragon's Dogma 2 is it's a Japanese developed game, but guys, this is a Western style RPG. Like, it's Japanese made, but it's Western styled. Although the gameplay and the nuances are still very Japanese. So there is that. But it's the same like with the Elden Ring games. Helldivers 2, which is online. Yeah, that's where it's kind of weird because Helldivers 2 it's kind of like a live service game. So, yeah, it gets kind of debatable. So there, on the one category, you have like for Final Fantasy, you got people saying like, "Hey, this is a remake of an old game." For this game, it's like, "Hey, this is a live service game. Why is this on here?" You know, like. Okay, well then if you remove those, then it's literally between these. And that's the reason why I still think Dragon's Dogma 2 is probably the best one. Like, if I had to pick one right now from this list, I would pick Dragon's Dogma 2. Hands down, Dragon's Dogma 2 is the best game I've played this year so far. It beats out Final Fantasy barely. And Final Fantasy barely beats out Infinite Wealth. So, I have not played Helldivers 2, but it's live service, so it might not even be considered. But I think they will consider it. Yeah, but this is the list, guys. Like, I feel like, this is not an unrealistic list. Okay, literally, what else is there? What else is there? Like, okay... Avatar? Do we really think Avatar is going to be on the list? Like, unless there's nothing else, if there's literally nothing else to even consider, maybe Avatar becomes the 5th game on the list. But I'll tell you guys, Avatar is going to win, like, best visuals. Like, Avatar is going to win best graphics. Whichever Mario game releases this year. I don't even think... That was last year, though. That was last year. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, I agree, Nicholas, 100%. Avatar was so boring. But Avatar is nice to look at, extremely boring to play. That's the reason why I don't consider it on the list. Like, I haven't finished that game because it's just so boring. Like, to me, Avatar is a benchmark application more than it is an actual game. Like, I use Avatar as a benchmark. I don't really play it as a game. So, but these are, for sure are, like, super good. So, I don't know, like, what, while we're at it, you know, like, WoW. Don't forget, WoW, The War Within, Final Fantasy XIV, Dawntrail. Like, these are the big MMOs, but like they're MMOs and they're like continuous games. So it's like, are these gonna be on here? No, probably not. So that kind of raises the question of whether or not Helldivers 2 should be in here, because that's a live service game. I think it should, because this is the year that it released. See, like, I personally think the year the game came out, even if it's a multiplayer, single player, or a whatever genre, fighting game, race car game, simulator game, regardless of any genre, the year that the game came out, it should have a fair chance at being Game of the Year. The thing is, if you're going to grade a game for Game of the Year, if a game is a multiplayer game, like Helldivers 2, for example, you're going to grade it with slightly different metrics. Like, for example, you're going to grade it on the multiplayer aspect, like the net code, the connectivity, server issues, that sort of thing. Like, these games don't have to worry about that, but this game will be held accountable for stuff like that. That will play into its score. So even though it could potentially, people might say, oh, it's unfair because this game always gets updates, whereas those are like done deals. Well, you're going to hold it to a slightly different standard because it's a multiplayer game. So it'll be harder. It'll be graded a little bit harder, is what I'm saying. Because it has more aspects to it. Like, it has the whole multiplayer online component that has to be graded as well. Star Wars Outlaws. Didn't someone say that Star Wars Outlaws already kind of bombed? Indiana Jones. Do we even know if that's coming out this year? I feel like a lot of people have mentioned Indiana Jones, but we know like nothing about that game. Greedfall 2 early. Greedfall 2 early? Too early? What does that mean? Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Isn't that like is that an MMO? Kingdom Come Deliverance? What is that? That sounds like an MMO. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Like, what is that? Sequel to the realistic medieval RPG? It's a medieval RPG? Yeah, well, a lot of the big gaming, well, I don't want to say big, but like they've got millions of subscribers, or at least one of them does. They're already advocating for Dragon's Dogma 2 for Game of the Year, so that's the thing. And when those large influencers start advocating for one game over a lot of others, you know it's probably going to end up on the list. That doesn't mean it's going to win, but that means that it will probably be on the list no matter what. So that one game out of this entire list is Dragon's Dogma 2. That's another reason why I think there's a high probability that it ends up winning. Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I googled it here. Let me see. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 announced. I mean, it looks interesting. You said it's a oh, is this like a strategy game or is this an RPG? How does the combat work in this? Like, is this turn-based? What is this? This is like a dragon right here, only it's medieval Europe. Yeah, I don't know how this is supposed to work. It's real-time combat, kind of hard. Oh, is it like Dark Souls? Is this like a Souls game? There's that one Italian Souls game too. I forgot what it's called. There's like an Italian one. Man, what was that game called? Enotria? Is that it? Hold up. This one? Yeah, this game. A new Souls like, man, it's almost like every year we get Souls likes now, which I'm all about that. Like if people want to keep making like Dark Souls clones, that's good. The more power to them. Because Lords of the Fallen and Lies of P last year taught me that developers can make Dark Souls-like games, and they can do it pretty well. I've said this before, Lords of the Fallen was the most fun game that I played last year. Like, hands down. Was it a flawless game? No. It had a lot of problems, but it was still fun regardless. So that shows you guys, it's not always about graphics. It's not always about how polished a game is. If the game is just so fun, that's all that really matters. Like, the game just has to be fun. Now, obviously, it can't be so broken and terrible that that ruins the experience. Then, yeah, if it was that bad, then no. But look, there's an Italian Souls game. The last song takes place in a sad and broken world. Oh, that sounds so cliche at this point. It's because all these games are like that. But you might not know it at first glance. So, okay, action RPG with a stirring sense of wonder, like B-roll footage of Xbox 360's Fable. Oh, wait, isn't Fable coming out? Like, I remember there was the Fable. There was a trailer for the upcoming Fable game. But then there was, like, all kinds of, like, memes and stuff about the characters looking ugly in that game. That's all I remember, and then I just kind of forgot about it. Isn't that supposed to come out this year? Or something? Like, I don't think... If it does, it's probably gonna be on the list. I don't know. Like, there's no competition this year. Enotria. This looks... No interest from the trailer. Is this coming out this year though? Like this, I don't know. There's this, but see, that's what I'm saying. Like there's only like one game that I know of that's coming out in the second half, and that's the WoW expansion. That's it. It's basically like the first half of the year is clumped with all the games. Then the second half of the year is nothing but computer hardware and WoW. It's like computer hardware plus WoW. That's literally all you have. Like, what's going on? What happened? You know what is hilarious? Can you guys imagine if the PS5 Pro launches and then Bluepoint and Sony announce Bloodborne Remake launch title for PS5 Pro? That straight up goes to like Game of the Year list. Because there's so many people that are waiting for that. There are so many people still waiting for Bloodborne 2, which is probably never going to happen. Bloodborne Remake is what a lot of people are asking for. That's kind of sad when people are asking for remakes of games that are only, this one's like 9 years old now. It isn't even a decade old, and people already want a remake of it. Or they at least want to be able to play it on other platforms other than the PS4. Hilarious. As far as I'm concerned, though, we're already getting a Souls-like game. Black Myth Wukong, this game is supposed to be... Yeah, this game. August 20th. Okay, so there's this. This, plus new hardware, plus World of Warcraft. That's basically all... That's literally the entire... I've described the entire second half of 2024. Black Myth Wukong... A bunch of new CPUs, a bunch of new GPUs, motherboards, and then World of Warcraft. And a 5090. And that's basically it. Fable doesn't even have a launch window. It'll probably be dust. Oh, we will probably be dust before that one releases. Nah, it's probably, like, I would say Fable's probably within the next 2 years. I can't see it being that much further out if they already showed that trailer. Yeah, this is going to be a big one, though. The problem is, I feel like people are setting their expectations very, very high. I hope this is not... Is this playing music? Okay. I feel like people are setting way too high expectations for this game, and they're probably going to be disappointed because I don't see this being an open world game. Like, this is going to be a mission level based game, kind of like Neo, if anything. It's not open world. It's not even going to be as open world as Sekiro. So people keep on saying like this is the spiritual successor to Sekiro. No, it's not. Like, people who are saying that are only going to disappoint themselves before the game is even out. This is basically going to be like a really, really good looking Wolong Fallen Dynasty at best. So, which is not terrible. Like, the gameplay, hold on. Let's actually look at some of this gameplay. This is another Unreal Engine 5 game. Is it gonna play? There we go.
你们一定都听过关于他的故事。有人说，他帮唐僧取到了真经，封了斗战胜佛。
What do you guys think? You think this could be Game of the Year? You think this is good competition for Dragon's Dogma?
也有人说，那个成佛的根本不是他，真正的他早就死在了西行路上。
I can tell you this is probably gonna be like the best looking game. So in terms of best graphics for like best graphics of 2024, it's either gonna be between this and Avatar. This versus Avatar. Because this is UE5. Avatar is Snowball and Engine.
你们一定没有听过。这个故事得从一只金蝉说起。
Okay, are they gonna show gameplay or are they just gonna show? Okay, this is it. Here we go. Here we go. Gameplay footage from a pre-alpha build. Work in progress. This is in engine, guys. This is not some pre-rendered cinematic. This is the in engine. You get to play as what is this? A wasp? No, this is a fly. You get to play as a fly? And there's Worgen from WoW in here? Okay, he does have a stamina bar. I like how he dodged a projectile when he was like catching the staff. Okay, that's I like that. That's cool. That's cool. I like that. That's like Mystic Spearhand in Dragon's Dogma right there. It's got that Dragon's Dogma look and feel to it. What did he do? He used the magic shield? Power pole extend. He did power pole extend. Yeah, okay. So far, the game that this makes me think of It's making me think of Wulong Fallen Dynasty. It's like Wulong Fallen Dynasty, but with better graphics. You basically play as a Mystic Spearhand from Dragon's Dogma, but the gameplay is like Wulong Fallen Dynasty with UE5 graphics. That's basically how I would describe it to somebody. Whoa, what is that? That's huge. Oh, you gotta do stealth. You have to do stealth gameplay, just like in the gacha games. They've got Metal Gear Solid 5 style stealth mechanics in the game, which Genshin Impact also copied years ago. Place your bet. Will this run like crap, or will it run? Well, okay. Given the fact that this is UE5, it's probably gonna be really hard to run. But if it's a single-player game, well, it doesn't even matter if it's single-player. I mean, if it's single-player or multiplayer, it's just UE5. So it's probably gonna require a pretty decent graphics card. I don't think it's gonna require too much CPU though, if it's a single-player game.
这禅院又被重建了，哎，可人心若是烧没了，修好一座破庙，又有什么用呢
？Why does it do the first-person camera angle like during the cutscene? They do first-person camera angle. You think you'll need a very good CPU and GPU? And not be known for great optimization? Isn't that like every game that's come out this year, except for Like a Dragon? Like a Dragon's like the only game that actually came out and runs really, really well and has like every single modern graphics API add-in. Yeah, you can see it stuttering on the spell effects. It's got that UE5 stutter, guys. It's a feature of UE5. Man, that's a lot of Worgens. It's like someone took the Worgens from WoW and made them train under the Pandarians from Mista Pandaria and gave them like kung fu moves. That's basically what's going on here. Okay, that's cool. You can actually transform. You can transform into other creatures. See, the progression is so level-based, it makes me think of Wulong Fallen Dynasty and Ninja Gaiden. Honestly, but the way the action plays, it literally looks to me like Wulong Fallen Dynasty with better graphics. That being said, that doesn't mean that it can't be Game of the Year. Because obviously this is not the full picture. Like, Sekiro was Game of the Year 2019. And that was a single-player game that was challenging action gameplay like this. So, if Sekiro can do it, this game could also do it. That's interesting. He has like a time freeze mechanic. He can freeze the enemy. He like snaps his finger and the enemy just freezes in midair and lets him counter it. So if you notice down here on the bottom left, there's a blue gauge. That's the mana gauge. The yellow gauge is the stamina bar. And then the white bar is the HP bar. And then obviously the boss HP bar is in the middle. he doing? What? I just summoned a whole bunch of clones. Hey, that's like Spirit Ashes. That's like Spirit Ashes from Elden Ring. This is not on a, this cannot be on a 14900K. You know why? This is pre-alpha footage from like last year. 14900K wasn't even out when this trailer first came out. This is probably, if I had to guess, this is either on a 10th gen Comet Lake CPU, or it's on, or it isn't even on any consumer CPU. It's probably on like a dev workstation. So it's either on like a Threadripper or a Xeon. And the GPU is not a 4090. It's probably some kind of professional workstation GPU. Usually pre-alpha builds where they show footage like this, they're going to be on a workstation. They're not going to be on like a consumer desktop. So no, this would not be on an i9. For all we know, it might even be like ancient Skylake X, like X299. Or some kind of server build or something like that. That's more likely. I mean, does this even look like it? Do you guys think this has any kind of ray tracing? It doesn't look like there's any RT in this, from what I can tell. It just looks like everything's pre-baked lighting. Yeah, this doesn't look like RT. Those enemies look like they're from Godfall. See, okay. Okay, that's pretty cool. Flying on Nimbus is pretty cool. That looks like that's gonna have a lot of frame rate drops. That looks like 30 FPS City right there. Look at all those drops. Oh man, all the smoke and the fog and the clouds and the volumetric lighting and the volumetric fog. That is gonna be Stutterfest City right there. What is this, Master Roshi? Shows Master Roshi. I don't know what that was about. That was so random. Okay. So based off of that, and that's not new gameplay. That's been like people have been able to watch that for over a year at this point, maybe even 2 years. So yeah, that was definitely on some kind of dev workstation with the stutters there at the end. It looks okay. The thing is, I keep drawing comparisons to Wolong Fallen Dynasty. Wolong Fallen Dynasty had a very generic story. This game could be so much better than that game in the story alone. But that remains to be seen, like how the developers go about doing storytelling and that sort of thing. The graphics look good. It's UE5. I mean, that's either a good or a bad thing. The gameplay, the combat looked fine from what I could tell. Wow, they did motion capture on animals. See that? They did motion capture on cats and stuff. So that's how they were able to create. Because I noticed there's a lot of there's a lot of creatures. There's a lot of different creatures. There's a lot of birds. There's different bugs. There's various different mammals like tigers. So that's cool how they did motion capture for the different animals to get the movement right and then render that in UE5. So that'll be interesting to see. So from a technical standpoint, this game could be very good. Technically speaking, it could be very good. It reminds you more of the God of War reboot. Just because the game is set in China, like it's ancient mythical China is the setting. Because of that, that's why I keep thinking of Wolong Fallen Dynasty. But in terms of the way that they're approaching the story and the world, this game is actually a lot more like Sekiro. Sekiro took place in ancient Japan, or like, I think it was like Sengoku era. It was somewhere around there in Japan. The thing is, the thing that From Software does so well, and this is the reason why people consider From Software the gold standard, is because they have a way of adding metaphysics and spiritualism into their game, and they do it in such a subtle way that you don't even notice it until it's like you notice it. You get subtleties, like bits and pieces of it, and then later on it's like bam in your face. Like Sekiro starts off, you're playing as basically like a ninja, and you're loyal to your lord, and you have to do all these things. You have to kill all these bad guys, whatever, from your point of view. And then as you get through the game, you encounter a giant snake that can literally swallow you in one gulp. You know, like, that's obviously not real, but that's an example of how they introduce fantastical elements, like mythical elements. There's a lot of there's ghosts. There's the theme of like the dead spirits, evil spirits. They touch on like yokai aspects in that regard, but they do it in such a subtle, minimalistic way that it's just enough that it just comes off as perfect. But I feel like this game is doing more than what Sekiro does. Like, this game's diving in headfirst on the mythical aspects of the story, like Monkey King Wukong himself as the main character. You know, all the different creatures that you meet. Like, this is like Sekiro on steroids when it comes to the metaphysics and the fantastical elements and the beasts and that sort of thing. Because there wasn't a whole lot of that in Sekiro. It was still mostly you're fighting humans most of the time. You're just killing samurai and other ninjas. Pretty much like 85% of the time you're fighting those type of enemies. The rest, that remaining 15% are demons, zombies, and ghosts and things like that. So it's definitely a more rare occurrence, whereas I feel like in this game it's going to be a more common occurrence. I feel like fighting humans in this game is probably going to be the minority. So it's basically like the opposite of Sekiro in that regard. So, and that is refreshing. The gameplay looked fine, but we'll see. So there's a lot of people that are hyping up this game. I'm not setting my expectations too high because I don't want to be disappointed. But yeah, that being said, this is another game to look out for. From what I've seen, though, I don't think this is a Game of the Year contender, although I could be proven completely wrong, and this could end up being just like Sekiro in 2019, where that game just straight up won. Just straight up just ran away with it. But yeah, and that was just a single-player action game. It was really, really hard. So, it doesn't look Game of the Year. Yeah, that's kind of the feeling that I'm getting too, if I'm being honest. But I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. It's definitely one worth keeping track of. But yeah. So that doesn't really change my list. I still think that that's the list that I've got. So. And Wukong's coming out in August. So, but anyway, just to round this out before we end the stream, the other one is FF14 Dawntrail. That comes out a week after Shadow of the Erd Tree. And that's basically June. There is one other game. Well, okay, that's July, so we won't cover that right now. But yeah, this is Q2, guys. This is Q2. So the only tech-related event, it isn't even a release of a product. It's just an event, is this. So, and that's happening in June. So we're pretty much here. And we still need to get through May, which basically has like nothing new. And then June, and there's still like nothing new from a hardware standpoint. So it won't be until July, which is basically the beginning of Q3. So July, at the very earliest, by that time we should be hearing about Zen 5. Now I don't know if Zen 5 will actually launch in July, because I have said originally, and I keep saying this, I still believe this, that Zen 5 is a Q3 launch. I'm starting to sound like a broken record at this point, because I think I've been saying this probably for almost a year at this point, that Zen 5 is coming in summer 2024. That's not new. There's live streams of me talking about this for like months ago. So, but it's coming. The thing that I don't know is Battle Mage. When is Battle Mage? Does anybody know? Anybody have any leaks? When is Battle Mage coming? Because that's the one that I would really, really want to see some more info on. This and Zen 5 are my two most interested products, I guess. That sounds really weird. I should re-say that. Okay. I am most interested in Zen 5 and Battle Mage. Meaning AMD's upcoming CPUs and Intel's upcoming GPUs. That is where all my interests lie right now with upcoming hardware releases. Your uncle that works at Intel told me it's coming in October. October? The same exact month as the... Oh, wow. Okay. Your uncle's sure of himself? Does he really know for sure? Okay, so we'll say Q4 then. So we're getting one product in Q3 and then everything else in Q4. That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. So here it is, guys. Q3, we have Zen 5. Q4, we have basically everything else. We have Battle Mage. We have Blackwell. We have PS5 Pro. We have RDNA 4. We have Arrow Lake. Like, literally, like everything else is going to be jam-packed into a 90-day window. Great. That's exactly what I want to hear. That's exactly what that's what all the salespeople at Micro Center and Best Buy want to know about. Like the fact that they're going to have lines of people outside every couple of weeks for stuff like this. That's fantastic. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I feel like there was one video. Someone was saying that Tom Peterson over at Intel said that Battle Mage was on track for a 2024 launch. So that could be true. So Q4 it is then. Yeah, that's lame. I hate when this happens. I really hate when that happens. I think anyone... Well, okay, if you're someone who's doing a brand new build, you probably like this because you can buy all the newest stuff all in the same window. But I don't know. I don't like having all the products jammed into a 3-month window because it's just my poor wallet. You know what I'm saying? Like, rip the wallet. At least when things are staggered, you can like save up in between. Because I was hoping for a list that looked kind of like this. in fact, well, yeah, that's realistic, I guess. I don't think that's asking for too much. And then Blackwell, PS5 Pro, RDNA 4, and Arrow Lake. This is what I was hoping for, but I don't know. I don't know if this is gonna happen. These are the two that I'm the most interested in, though. And that's why I wish they would come out in the summer. So I can get them both and do videos about them at the same time. Rather than doing, you know, like cramming all this stuff. I feel like reviewers don't like that. Reviewers don't like when this happens. Because that requires like so many hours to cram like review after review of product after product. All concurrently, all at once. You get that big boost in view count. But then literally, like, after all of this goes away, then the view count just goes back down. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's not ideal. It's better to have the product staggered. You're sending thoughts and prayers to the wallet. Yeah, the wallet could suffer an aneurysm when everything's stacked together like that. But that's pretty much the year. The first half of the year. This year is pretty interesting. It's easy to describe 2024. It's like the first half of the year is all about gaming. The second half of the year is all about computer hardware. And there's a game console. That's an oversimplification, but that's basically 2024 if you're looking at it from a hardware enthusiast point of view. Well, not even that. Like from a PC gamer, I guess. That's one way to look at it. Well, no, because PC gamers don't even know that this stuff is in the pipeline. They don't even know. Like, pretty much 99%, or okay, maybe not 99%, 96% of PC gamers, they have no idea that this, well, okay, maybe the PS5 Pro, but they don't even know when this, they have no idea. Like, they have no idea. Unless they watch a channel like this, they have no idea. So, they're gonna buy, like, something now, and then they're gonna regret it, like, later in the summer. You know what I mean? They're gonna waste money on, like, some, I don't know, whatever, and then it's like, oh, feels bad. I think most people think Intel gave up on GPUs with Arc. Yeah, I guess. Most gamers don't pay attention to Intel Arc Battlemage or RDNA 4 GPUs. Yeah, you know what? Most gamers don't know what this indicates either, so... That's why I use code names. In fact, we should probably even, like, rename this. We should start referring to Zen 5 as Granite Ridge. Just use a bunch of, like, code names. Just talk in code names. It's like speaking a different language. It's like speaking a different language. You know, like, mask what you're saying around normies or non-computer hardware people so they have no idea what you're saying. You know, like, if I ask somebody, like, are you on Summit Ridge? What generation CPU is that? You know, like, or what, are you on Kepler, or is that a Maxwell? Is this Summit Ridge? Or is this Pinnacle Ridge? You know what I'm saying? Like, I can talk in code. I can talk in code. I'm bilingual. I can speak, well, I'm trilingual, quadlingual, whatever. I can speak in, like, code. I can speak in code all day. We want to talk about Ampere. We want to talk about Turing. Maybe we want to talk about, or do we want to talk about something that's really old? We want to talk about Bulldozer. We want to talk about the Southern Islands. How about Tahiti? How about them Pitcairn? The Volcanic Islands. How about that? Or the Northern Islands. How about that upcoming Trinity, guys? You guys plan on getting Trinity? See, I can talk in code. I can talk in code and confuse any random PC gamer that has no idea what I'm talking about. It's like if we were to bust out speaking in like Portuguese or something. Now I can't speak Portuguese, but like if Marcelo and I just started randomly speaking in Portuguese, you know, that like the viewership would probably just drop off like a rock. You know, not try to offend like the Portuguese. I'm just saying like this is like I'm speaking in English. If I switch languages all of a sudden, if I start speaking in like Portuguese or Mandarin or some random arbitrary other language that people are watching the stream currently can't understand, you know, like what? I'm here for it. Yeah, so when we can talk in code, you guys want to talk code? Like I don't typically use code descriptions, engineering code words, because I know that if I do that, I'm alienating new viewers that are trying to learn. Será que? Oh man, I can barely pronounce Portuguese. If I try to say that, I'm gonna say it like I'm speaking in Spanish, and it's not gonna come across right. So, if anybody wants to translate, entender isso que eu estou, what? I don't know what you said. Like I don't know. Consegue? I don't know what that means, man. I find it fascinating how Portuguese is different from Spanish, even though like Portugal and Spain are literally right next to each other. Yet Italy and Spain are further apart from each other, but Spanish and Italian, to me at least, seem more similar than Portuguese and Spanish, which is interesting. I would have thought that Portuguese and Spanish would be more similar and Italian would be more different, but it seems like it's the other way around. Is that a correct assessment? Like, is Spanish and Italian more similar? Because the reason why I'm saying this is because I remember, I think I've said this in a previous stream. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I think I've told you guys this story before. I remember there was a guy from Spain. When I was in Japan, there was someone from Spain that I came across, and he was telling me that if an Italian talks to him slowly in their language, like if someone speaks slow Italian to him as a Spaniard who doesn't natively speak Italian, he can talk back slowly in Spanish, and the two of them can actually understand what they're saying. They can actually have a conversation with each other slowly. If they talk slow enough, they can both understand. Like he could talk slow Spanish, the other guy could talk slow Italian, and they can understand. Now I don't know, does that work? Like if someone speaks Spanish to someone who understands Portuguese, like for example Marcelo, if someone starts talking to you in Spanish, if they talk or Italian, if they talk slow enough, would you be able to understand them? Or even if they're not talking slow, like how much Spanish and Italian can you understand before it gets to the point where you don't really know what's being said? Like, if that makes any sense. Because, you know what, I had like Japanese people ask me, like, can you understand British people and Australian people? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, it's not that different. like American English and British English sound different to people who English is their second language. Like you can tell it's different in the sound because the accent is pretty distinct, but the vocabulary is not that different. The vocabulary is actually different. There are different words for different things. It can work, but most Spanish speakers talk too fast. But if they talk slow enough, would you be able to understand them? That's what I'm curious to know, because I know Portuguese sounds like a more smoother sounding Latin type language to me, like to my ears, as someone who doesn't know any Portuguese, but I know a little bit of Spanish. But I don't use Spanish enough to be able to converse with someone in Spanish. But like if somebody if someone says basic things to me in Spanish, I know what they're saying. I may not be able to reply back in Spanish, but I'll understand what they're saying. Now, if someone speaks to me in Portuguese, I won't know what they're saying because it's just, to me, it's too different. But that's what, like, I had this conversation with like a Japanese person where they were telling me, it's like, do you have trouble understanding someone from England or someone from Australia? Like they never questioned Canada. Like Americans, like North America, if you're Canadian or American, doesn't really matter. Like you basically sound similar enough to someone who doesn't understand English as a primary language that they'll consider you guys the same. But like if someone is from England or Australia, the accent is different enough that someone who's studying English will pick up that there's a difference. Like there's a noticeable difference in intonation, the tonality of the language is different, the pitch accent for some words are different, you know what I'm saying? Like the vowel sounds are also kind of different. Canadians can't understand me even when I speak in slow English. Yeah, I always wondered about like Portuguese because Portuguese is like it's like a cooler version of Spanish. I've always thought of Portuguese as like the cool sounding Latin language because I don't understand it, so it just automatically sounds cooler to me. It sounds more smooth, whereas I don't want to say it sounds like it's singing or rhyming. It sounds smoother. I don't know how to describe it. Like if I describe Asian languages to you guys, like East Asian languages, just to use them as examples, like I think of Korean as like a smoother sounding version of like Japanese. It's 90% the same in terms of the grammar, the sentence structure, like it's SOV, subject object verb. Like Korean and Japanese are the same in that regard. But I have always thought Korean sounds like it's like really smooth sounding Japanese, even though it's nothing like Japanese. Like the vocabulary is completely different, but the sentence structure is the same. And I've always thought the same about Portuguese. Portuguese is like the smoother sounding version of the Latin languages. I guess French also is another like really smooth sounding language. That's just completely different though. Like that's not even, I feel like French is not even related to Spanish and Portuguese. It's like off in its own little world. Yeah, that's another one that's cool though. Like I like the sound of French, even though I don't even know what's going on. Like if someone busts out in French, I don't know what's happening. If someone talks in Portuguese, occasionally I can link, depending on how similar the word is to Spanish, assuming I know the word in Spanish, I can grasp onto that word and then try to figure out the context of what's being said. But I don't know enough. I don't know enough of any Portuguese really to be able to comprehend like whatever Marcelo said. I don't know what you said, so it's like if I try to translate what you said, here's what I'll try to translate it. You said something what here I don't know what consegue is. Intent I don't know. I give up. Or it's like did you say something is this asking what, or it's like what's here what's written is it understood? I don't know, man. Like I don't know. I'm just trying to understand. I'm just trying to take your Portuguese writing and turn it into Spanish and then try to turn it into English, and I can't. I don't know. It's like a double translation. I just can't do it. Can anyone understand what I was? Okay, yeah, I said writing. I was like, what is será? What is that? Is that what? Is that can? Is like the equivalent of asking a question? Because que is like what, right? In Spanish, que is what? Alguem? I don't know what that means. That's weird. Entender is like here. Escribiendo is written, right? Is that written? The last word is like written or write or wrote or something. It's like escribir. Escribir in Spanish is to write. I know that. I think I got that right. I think I remember that. But yeah, man, like it's rough when you go to a foreign country and as soon as the natives know that you can speak English and that you know some Spanish, they automatically want you to be like their Spanish translator, even though I've never used Spanish. So it's like I end up having to double translate things. Oh, okay. Alguem, I don't even know how to pronounce it properly. Alguem? I don't know. I might be butchering that pronunciation. Entender? Entender is okay, you said it's understand. Okay. See, when I saw that, I was thinking comprehend was what I was thinking, but I wasn't sure. Similar sounding. To understand, to comprehend, it's kind of similar, but I was thinking like to comprehend. But I wasn't too confident in saying that. I know the last word you wrote is like write or written or something like that. Yeah, that's what I would do, man. Like if I could just like travel the world and just not like have to work and stuff, I'd probably be one of those like polyglots. I'd probably try to learn like a whole bunch of languages. I sound like an Arabic person talking Portuguese. That's hilarious because I don't know any Arabic. I can't. Oh man, yeah. Wow, that's funny. Wow. Here, let me try to read it again. Hold on, where is it? Okay, I'll read it. ¿Será que alguien consigue entender eso que eu estou escrevendo? I don't know. It probably sounded terrible. Does that sound like an Arab person? Escrevendo, I think I'm saying correctly. That's probably like the only word that I said correctly besides que. Wow. Yeah, because I'm trying to think the last time I had to actually speak in Spanish. I think the last time I spoke Spanish was when I was in Japan. That would have been like, how many years was that? 5 years ago? I had to speak Spanish to somebody because they didn't know where they were going. Like they were asking me directions, and I had to speak in Spanish. I had to like work really hard to try to speak in Spanish, and I was on the spot. It was probably a terrible accent. No, because I told you, like, there's a guy from Spain. There was like someone visiting from Spain, and they were trying to get to some event in Shinjuku or somewhere in like the big downtown. And he was asking for directions, and he was trying to ask it. At first, he was trying to ask in like some kind of it was like very, very basic Japanese. But then when he said he's from Spain, I tried to speak in Spanish, and then he's just busted out in Spanish because it was like so much easier for him. So then I had a hard time because I had to translate in my mind because my Japanese wasn't even that good. So I had to translate a Japanese place and the directions in my head into English. And then I had to take the English and turn it into Spanish. So I was doing what, like 1, 2... Is that like triple translating? I was triple translating. Internally, I'm triple translating. But like, to him, it looks like I'm just translating. But I was like translating 3 times. I was translating internally to English, Japanese to English, then English to Spanish. It was just so bad. Like it was so bad. He was able to get to where he needed to go, but man, it was like I almost wanted to have to stop like a random Japanese person to ask for help. But it was no, it was interesting though, man. Like communication skills are really good skills to have, and I'm of the opinion that the more languages you know, the more opportunities you have in life in general. Like, and that applies to everything. That applies to career. That applies to just meeting people in general and being able to communicate with people. Even if you don't even know the language that well, at least make the effort. I mean, that's my opinion. And my thing is, don't be, even though I butchered that Portuguese sentence, I still dare to try. Like, I'm not, even though I probably sound horrible, if I keep at it, you know, you're only going to get better, right? It's like a, think of it like a 3-year-old child, you know, speaking their mother's language for the first time. Like, obviously they're going to sound terrible. They're going to make tons of mistakes, but eventually, you know, practice, you get through it. So, yeah. But yeah, it was funny because the more I try to it's interesting. The more I try to use what I know, at a certain point, like what I'm saying is the more I know of another language like Spanish, which is not my native language, but the more I try to think up things in Spanish and say that, or Japanese or whatever, you know, like at a certain point, like it's like my brain, and I think this is true of anyone, it just clicks. It's like when Goku, or it's like when Gohan like becomes Super Saiyan for the first time, or like when Vegeta became Super Saiyan for the first time, where he just didn't care anymore. It's like he was focusing so much, and then he just kind of like, you let go, and it just, something just clicks in your mind, and then you can just start speaking. You know, you just start speaking. You can only say what you know in terms of vocabulary, but when your mind clicks over into that other language, you start forming the thoughts in the language using the vocabulary that you know, so you're limited in what you can say, but you continuously can form the basic thoughts, and then you can just speak, and it's a fascinating thing. Like, and I can only imagine people that are bilingual, like they're really, really bilingual. Like, I guess, like in this case, Marcelo, you can speak Portuguese and English, or at least your written English is very good. So I assume your English is good. Like people who are bilingual at that level, I feel like that's a fascinating thing where they can just translate things on the fly without even thinking about it, because you already have full comprehension of both languages, like whatever you're translating, so it's easy for you to be able to do that. I find that fascinating. I'm a big fan of like language acquisition. I feel like that's a hobby that I like. If I wasn't doing tech stuff, I'd probably be doing like language learning related stuff, stuff like that. Because that, I just feel like that's cool. Like, especially when people know, like, 5 or more languages. Like, polyglots. Like, there's polyglots on YouTube that can speak in, like, 12, like, I don't know, something like half a dozen or more languages. And they're, like, so good that they can just bust out on the fly into... And the thing that you know when they're good, because they can switch automatically. Like, for me, like I was saying earlier... If I really want to start speaking, if I want to try to speak in Spanish, or if I want to try to speak in Japanese and make an effort, that initial effort, you have to really, really focus. And then at a certain point, like something inside your mind just clicks, and then you don't have a problem. But someone who is so good and has full mastery of other languages, they can just switch. It's like when Goku just can go Super Saiyan just without thinking about it. You know, that's the easiest way I can compare it. Like he just goes Super Saiyan. You don't have to try to strain and think too hard. It just bam. You know, like that's switch. Go Super Saiyan. Drop back to base form. Go back to Super Saiyan. Go to Super Saiyan 2. Like that's how I feel like bilingual people, trilingual people. That's how they are, where they can just translate on the fly. They can speak one sentence in English, one sentence in Portuguese or whatever, you know, whatever their other languages that they know, they can just start just busting out in full on comprehension. It's hilarious, or not hilarious. It's actually fascinating to me. So yeah, that's why I keep telling you guys stories like that's why I would say stuff like, okay, a Spanish person, an Italian person, and maybe a Portuguese person, they can speak, or someone who knows those languages, they can talk to each other slow enough, and then they can each comprehend each other. I don't think English has an equivalent. I feel like if I had to declare one equivalent to that, I'd probably say German, or maybe the Dutch language. I feel like if somebody who speaks German, or someone who spoke maybe the Dutch language, what is that called? That's not Danish, is it? I feel like those languages are the ones that if someone spoke German slow enough to me, and I replied back to them in English, maybe we could converse. I don't know. That's something that I would like to test someday. And I don't mean reading something. I mean like talking. You know, having a conversation. Because reading something, okay, just reading the words and then try to comprehend. The problem with reading a sentence without any context, without any listening context, when you can't hear the words being spoken, you can't grasp onto the nuance and the context of what's being said. So that's why it has to be a conversation, like person to person, not like me reading something in German or me reading something, you know what I'm saying? But I feel like German and English are probably the two, like that will be like the only one that I can think of, because Portuguese and Spanish could probably converse slow enough and understand the context of what's being said. I think German and English can also do that. Possibly. I could be wrong, but I think the reason why I'm saying this is because if I watch like Der Bauer or Igor's Lab, because these are other like tech tubers, if I watch them if I watch Igor, because I know he mostly just does his content in German, like if I watch his video and I don't watch with subtitles, I literally just watch the video and just listen to him and listen to what he's saying, I can pick up on what he's talking about, especially if you slow down the audio playback. If you slow it down to like 0.75, like as an English native, I can understand what is being said in German if it's slow enough. If it's slow enough and I have context of what's being said. You know, like I can say, okay, he's talking about the RTX 4090's power connector melting. Okay, and when he's describing specific things, I can if it's said slow enough, I can pick up on specific things of what he's actually saying. So I think German and English are the two kind of sister languages, I guess, kind of like Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian. So poor French, because French is just out there. I guess Flemish and French are the same. But yeah, anyway, guys, that was like a huge tangent, completely unrelated to this, but we kind of like ran out of things to talk about anyway that was tech related. Besides talking in code, I mean, that whole segment was like talking in code. So that's gonna be it for this stream. Trying to think like if I am gonna do a weekend stream. I do need to finish Dragon's Dogma 2. I also do need to finish Final Fantasy 7. I want to finish one of those games this weekend. I might as well finish this one because I think I'm closer to finishing this game. I'm literally at the last chapter. Can you, the VC, after the stream? Maybe for a short while. Maybe for a short while. I guess something I've got to do first, but... Okay, guys, that's going to be a stream. That's going to be this Week in Tech, episode 56. We will be back next week with... what are we going to talk about next week? I feel like there's nothing to talk about that's tech-related. I'm grasping at straws here, guys, but I'll think of something. Maybe some leaks or something will come out between now and next week. So that's going to be it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I will catch you guys in the next one. Take care. Thanks.